Honorable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to members of his government, members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen. Honorable members, as it is our custom, we pay tribute to members and former members of this Assembly who have passed away since we last met. Peter Elzinga served as the Progressive Conservative member for Sherwood Park from 1986 to 1993. He was the Minister of Agriculture from 1986 to 1989, Minister of Economic Development and Trade from 1989 to 1992, and the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Relations and the Deputy Premier from 1992 to 1993. Mr. Elzinga was raised in Edmonton and had a farming background in grain and livestock production before turning to federal politics. He was a member of Parliament for Pembina, Alberta from 1974 to 1986. After retiring from the Assembly, he remained involved in politics and government, running campaigns and as the Premier Klein's Chief of Staff. Mr. Elzinga described his time in public life as, quote, a beautiful burden, and expressed his appreciation for the chance to contribute to ideas and perspectives to the matter of public interest. His exemplary contributions include the Elzinga Family Foundation, created in 1994 to provide educational scholarships for those in financial need, and his decision in 2004 to donate a kidney to a longtime friend. Among his many honors and awards, Mr. Elzinga received the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee in 2002 and the Alberta Centennial Medal in 2005. Mr. Elzinga passed away on November 8, 2023 at the age of 79. In a moment of silent prayer, I ask that you each remember Peter Elzinga as you may have known him. Rest eternal, grant unto him, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon him. Honorable members, it is the last sitting day of the week, and we will now be led in the singing of God Save the King by the Honorable the Minister of Environment and
God save our gracious King, long live our noble King. God save the King, send him victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King.
Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors.
Honorable members, there is a great debt of gratitude that is owed to the family members of those who have served in public office. It's my honor to introduce members of former member Elzinga's family and friends who are joining us here in the Speaker's Gallery. I'd like to introduce to all members Peter's wife of 58 years, Patricia, his sons, Greg and Roger, Mr. Elzinga's daughter-in-law, Gayleen, and grandson, Aaron. We also have Peter's sister and brother-in-law, Dorothy and Tom Portis. Lastly, we have Peter's longtime constituency assistant and friend, Linda Lesser. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Introduction of guests.
The Honourable the Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce you to 114 students and teachers from the wonderful school of Lois E. Hole from the amazing riding of Mornville, St. Albert. If I could please ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Member for Sherwood Park has an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to all the members of the Assembly, I'm honored to introduce Linda Lessard of Sherwood Park. I know every member of this Assembly values the incredible work of our constituency staff. Linda was the constituency manager for Peter Elzinga for his entire elected career. And please, Linda, you've been introduced once, but please rise once again and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly for
member for Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and please introduce to you and through you a group from Stettler, a school group from Stettler, and some of my family. So I would love to introduce my sister-in-law Bonnie and her kids River, Clayton, Lily, and Hunter. Would you please rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly?
The Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce to you and through you from the University of Lethbridge, President and Vice Chancellor Dr. Digvir Jehas, as well as Richard Westland, Executive Director of Communications, Marketing and Government Relations. I ask they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Lesser Slave Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to introduce both to you and through you my amazing constituency manager, Chad Bowers, and his family, Brianne, Reed, Tricia, Nathan, Natalie, and Jack, and also a couple of friends of mine, young business leaders from the Harms Auto Group, Mitch and Kurt Buban. Please rise and accept the warm reception of this gathering.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you dedicated community volunteers and team members from the Chinese Multicultural Herald, Editor-in-Chief Yan Xie, journalist Cheryl Wang, and Mark Ma. Please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce to you and through you Mr. Vikas Kapoor and Mr. Kamaljeet Kinda from Choice Travel and Tours, a couple of entrepreneurs who have successfully operated here in Edmonton. They reflect the small businesses across Alberta that are the backbone of our economy and society. Please rise and receive the warm welcome.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Camrose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you two members from my community, Eugene Trabeck, who is the Chair of Beaver Foundation, and Owen Lagarde, who is the CAO. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Chamber.
Are there others? Seeing none.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South has a statement to make.
Close to the end of the fall semester, many students are feeling the overbearing weight of the affordability crisis. So many students have reached out to me and told me that they feel abandoned by this government, that their calls for action are falling on deaf ears. And who can blame them? Many of these students live in Edmonton South, and while many of them are young people, many are folks that are going back to school to reskill and upskill in order to meet the changing needs of our economy. They have families they're providing for, and they can barely cover the cost of tuition, books, food, and rent. So how is it acceptable that they must choose between paying their tuition and having a roof over their heads and putting food on the table? The University of Alberta campus is seeing a 400% increase in demand of services compared to 2022, and they're going through 500 pounds of food per week. Nearly 1/3 of their clients are under the age of 18. They are children, Mr. Speaker. Children whose parents are doing everything they can to pursue their education and provide a better life for their families. It's no question that challenges of student affordability will continue to be an issue with this government refusing to properly fund post-secondaries here in Alberta. Without a stable, predictable funding model, institutions are forced to put more of the burden on students. So why does this government continue to refuse to provide relief to keep life affordable for students and their families? This is a question I will continue to ask on behalf of thousands of students across Alberta and in Edmonton South. Thank you.
The honourable member for Grande Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am excited to discuss the significant strides Alberta has taken in managing its financial resources prudently, fostering a path towards a more promising future. The mid-year fiscal update is a testament to our government's commitment to fiscal responsibility and balancing the budget. Despite navigating through economic uncertainties, Alberta's economy shows resilience with a projected surplus of $5.5 billion, an impressive increase of $3.2 billion from the initial budget in 2023 projections. This surplus shows our dedication to careful financial planning and effective governance for a more positive economic future. We are actively addressing the provincial debt by the reduction of our province's debt burden, and this year we're going to be able to pay down a forecasted $3.2 billion of Albertans' debt. This demonstrates our commitment to fiscal prudence and ensures our government isn't mortgaging our future with reckless spending. By addressing these financial obligations, we are fortifying Alberta's economic foundation, strengthening our credibility and appeal to potential investors. However, amid our fiscal achievements, we remain aware of global economic uncertainties, high interest rates, and high consumer spending. Our legislated fiscal framework remains more important than ever, serving as a guiding compass and ensuring our decisions are measured and sensible in the face of unpredictable global dynamics. This surplus is not just good luck, nor is it just a windfall. It represents a strategic resource that we intend to use to foster sustained economic growth. Mr. Speaker, our government's commitment to fiscal responsibility shows. As we move forward, let us continue to embrace responsibility and innovation in our financial strategies. Together, let's pave for...
The honourable member for Calgary-Bullard-McCall.
The Charter protects basic rights and freedom of all Canadians, including freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, and freedom of peaceful assembly. These rights and freedoms are essential and fundamental to our democracy. Albertans exercise these rights to voice their concerns, opinion, thoughts, and show their support or opposition to issues they care most about. In the last few weeks, we have seen many Albertans expressing their concerns over the crisis in Gaza and Israel. On November 19, a protest was held in Calgary where some arrests were made by the law enforcement. In one instance, a hijab-wearing woman was arrested, which resulted in her hijab being removed during the arrest. In another instance, a 14-year-old boy was arrested. There are numerous videos circulating on social about these arrests. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that concerns over these arrests run deep and wide in the community. Many community members, faith leaders, and community organizations have reached out to us, and I'm pleased to see now that the ACERT is investigating. I recognize it's important that Albertans have trust and confidence in their law enforcement and the work they do each and every day. That is why it's important the concerns raised by the community must not go unaddressed. It's also why the Leader of the Official Opposition and I are writing to the Justice Minister today to ask for the development of national policing standards, for enhanced coordination among law enforcement agencies, and for additional funding be provided to assist with security as places of worship. We are also asking that the Minister to consider referring all matters concerning these protests to ACERT. Mr. Speaker, in a healthy democracy, no one is above the law, and accountability is key to that. I urge the government to take these concerns and suggestions seriously and act now. Thank you.
Paul Link, please. The Sergeant. The honourable member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm deeply proud to call myself a rural Albertan. The people I represent and the breathtaking landscapes we call home are second to none. I'm proud to have served as a rural nurse, mayor, and now as MLA. These experiences have given me a profound understanding of the unique challenges that rural Alberta faces and the tremendous potential and opportunities we have as well. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciates rural Alberta as much as I do. When the NDP was in power, they mistreated our rural communities. They called us names like sewer rats, embarrassing cousins, and they told us to walk or take the bus if we couldn't afford their job-killing carbon tax. They ignored our economic future by doing things like investing $0 into rural broadband expansion, and they waged war on our family farms and ranches with their Bill 6 legislation. Some may disagree, but I am proud that rural Alberta has strong representation in this chamber and in this government. The United Conservatives have showed a steadfast commitment to the well-being and prosperity of rural Alberta by doing things like investing in local infrastructure and community development projects, bolstering essential services, introducing rural-focused grants, and allocating a historic $390 million into rural broadband expansion and piloting the cutting-edge Starlink satellite technology. We have also been successful in onboarding 190 doctors to work in Alberta, strategically placing them in communities like the Crow's Nest Pass. We know that rural Alberta is no longer just a place you come from, but a place you go to for high-paying jobs, quality education, and affordable living. While our government has achieved a lot already, there's always more work to be done, just like on the family farm or ranch. Unlike the NDP, who recoil at all things rural Alberta, we will be here for all Albertans, including those who live in rural communities, every step of the way.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the constituency of Sherwood Park, especially my mom, who I know is watching right now, I want to extend my sincere condolences to the family and friends of Peter Elzinga for your recent loss. My parents, Edwin and Nancy, met Peter and Patricia Elzinga in 1978 through the Sherwood Park Kinsmen and Connect clubs. These clubs hold the ideals of friendship and giving back to one's community. Elzingas, Lazards, Kozowskis, and many more families built Sherwood Park one community-led initiative at a time. They built the first swimming pool, created Kinsman Park, established a volunteer information center, brought the Christmas Bureau to Sherwood Park, established a safe place for women and children facing family violence. They took the initiative and raised the money and support needed to have firefighters cross-trained as EMTs in Strathcona County. Many will forget a time when people in Sherwood Park waited for ambulances to come from the city. It can be difficult to know how we are affecting others, but I can tell you a story about a young man and how a meeting with Peter Elzinga restored his faith in this assembly. In 1997, a controversial coal mine was proposed on the eastern slopes of Jasper National Park. It was in the news. The mining company seemed to be getting preferential treatment by the government, and I was losing faith in the system to protect our environment. My dad told me to call Peter Elzinga. Peter took my call. He invited me here for a simple lunch in the basement cafeteria of the legislature. I don't know if he was the Premier's Chief of Staff or the Executive Director of the PC Party or both at the time, but he met me and he left an indelible impression on me. I had Peter Elzinga as my role model for how I think an elected representative should serve their constituents, and I am eternally grateful for his service to our province and Sherwood Park. God rest his soul.
We'll do it. Let's do it. The honourable member for Banff-Kananaskis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year, Alberta and Canada experienced their worst wildfire seasons. It's horrifying for communities. While the members opposite like to downplay the role of climate change and blame an epidemic of arsonists for this, we prefer to base our policy recommendations on facts. Fact: climate change is making our forests drier. It's late November and Banff is under a fire advisory. Fact: climate change is altering precipitation patterns across Alberta. Fact: a drier soil throughout the year leads to increased fire risk in the spring, summer, and fall. It's not a matter of if a devastating wildfire hits Banff-Kananaskis, it's a matter of when. Our communities need to reduce wildfire risk. In a rural riding with a lot of provincial land, much of the responsibility to reduce wildfire risk falls to the provincial government. Canmore and the hamlets within the MD of Bighorn are surrounded by a mature forest of highly flammable spruce. Apparently, there's a Bow Valley wildfire and vegetation management plan in the works. This plan must be a top priority and publicly released, and soon. The MD of Bighorn has volunteer on-call firefighters and a massive 2,800 kilometre square land base, making prompt response to wildfire challenging. They need support to increase capacity and build another fire hall. The volunteer fire department in Benchlands needs the autonomy to update wildfire risk signage at the entrance to the Ghost so that recreationists are prepared. The communities of Redwood Meadows and Bragg Creek need provincial support to increase fire smarting efforts in and around town. Alarm bells are going off. Banff Kananaskis needs help. Literally millions of people visit this riding each year to enjoy the outdoors, and they generate billions of dollars for the provincial economy. Our small municipalities are charged with keeping them safe, ensuring they enjoy their experience, and continuing Alberta's legacy as an international tourist destination. We can't do those things without government support for wildfire.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the honourable member for Edmonton Glenora has question 1.
The UCP just tried to pretend like everything's sunny, but the truth is that many Albertans are facing very dark times. Calgary's rental prices are rapidly increasing, faster than anywhere else in the country, Mr. Speaker. And there are currently 5,300 families on the wait list for affordable housing in Calgary alone. So how can the Finance Minister paint such a rosy picture when these families don't even have a place to call home?
The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister is painting a rosy picture because the Conservative government is fixing the mess that was created by the NDP when it came to our affordable housing stock. Underneath the NDP, Mr. Speaker, you saw affordable housing stock go down by 76%, Mr. Speaker, shockingly because they invested no money in affordable housing, Mr. Speaker. This government, together with our partners right now, is investing $9 billion, Mr. Speaker, to create 25,000 more units of housing, Mr. Speaker. Many of those units are already online, Mr. Speaker, and Calgary and Edmonton continue to be the most affordable large cities in the world, Mr. Speaker.
Wow. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, none of those talking points, which aren't based on fact, actually put a roof over those 5,300 families' heads. Yeah. The UCP government spun a balance sheet this afternoon, but the truth is that Edmontonians are being pushed out of every room they need to access, like emergency rooms, classrooms, even one-bedroom apartments. Public services are bursting at the seams, and the UCP is telling them to hop on the Henday and find a high school or hospital somewhere else. Will the minister commit to building the South Hospital and the necessary schools that we desperately need in Edmonton?
The Honourable the Minister of Seniors and Community Social Services.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the Health Minister and the Infrastructure Minister have answered that question before, but let's talk about facts, Mr. Speaker. The construction rates across this province have increased by 11% right now, Mr. Speaker, in this year, the most in history. Over 30-some% of that, Mr. Speaker, are purpose-built rentals. Also the most in history, Mr. Speaker. Those are facts. Here's the facts, Mr. Speaker. When the NDP was in government, they made life unaffordable for all Albertans. When the Conservatives were in government, Mr. Speaker, we have tackled affordability, Mr. Speaker, including with the largest investment in affordability anywhere in the country.
The order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora.
The question was about building schools and hospitals to the Finance Minister, and we got hot air from another minister. In terms of moving forward, Mr. Speaker, Bob Aska, the former director of the Institute of Public Economics at the University of Alberta, said, and I quote, "Pension money is not government money." The majority of Albertans would agree with this fact. The UCP government is acting, however, like they're entitled to the reward that Albertans have worked their entire lives to enjoy. This isn't fun money, Mr. Speaker. This is basic income that seniors are offered to sustain their golden years. Why won't the government back off their plan to take their pensions?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, that member knows that Alberta's pensions are completely safe. We've been clear with Albertans that we are engaging, we're consulting. We've been told we have the right to consider this by the federal government. We've asked them to get back to us with help from the chief actuary. We'll come back to them with new information on this. The other part of the question was about our finances. Yeah, today's a great day. $3.2 billion increase. Schools, hospitals, all of that important infrastructure will be looked at as part of Budget 24.
Order. The only one with the call is the Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, at the Rotary Club in St. Albert, the Minister of Service Alberta praised the UCP's risky pension scheme, calling the LifeWorks report compelling, despite it being riddled with miscalculations and gaps. This plan jeopardizes the retirement security of countless Albertans, especially our seniors in need, who depend heavily on the reliable Canada Pension Plan. How can the Minister advocate for this precarious alternative, putting the financial stability of our most vulnerable seniors at risk?
The Honourable, the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, we've been clear since the Fair Deal panel recommended that we pursue this, since we RFP'd the report, since Morneau Chappelle won the RFP, former federal finance for Bill Morneau's company. It's not like this was some rinky-dink outfit, Mr. Speaker. We're engaging with Albertans. We've made clear to Albertans that if this ever were to be pursued by this government or a future government, that they would need to go through a referendum. We're committed to that process.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
So far, the UCP's sham consultations have included a bias survey, screen telephone town halls, and more recently, a long-winded workbook that still doesn't give Albertans any meaningful information, not to mention it's not in French and not accessible. 2 weeks ago, the Minister was this close to attending a face-to-face town hall with seniors in St. Albert, and then he cancelled a day before the event, rebooked it, and cancelled 4 hours before it was meant to happen. Why won't this Minister meet with his constituents and meet with Albertans? What is he afraid of?
The Honourable, the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if that member, any of the members opposite, have actually looked at the report. The report clearly shows that through the interpretation of the formula, the methodology that was used by LifeWorks, that Alberta is entitled to a large asset withdrawal because the formula contributes a lot of the investment income to the net contributors, of which there's only 3 in this country: Alberta, Ontario, and a small part BC. What we're asking Albertans is this something they want to pursue? Should this be considered? That's it. And we're protecting with a referendum.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Today we hosted our second in-person town hall in St. Albert, and what do you know? Over 400 people showed up, not an empty chair in sight. Albertans are desperate to meet with this government, yet the UCP seem to prefer a game of hide and seek over genuine engagement. We've rolled out the red carpet multiple times for the UCP, even reserving a VIP seat. Will the Minister grace us with his presence at the next town hall, or are they planning to RSVP with another no-show?
Wow. The Honourable, the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, our engagement isn't concluded. The first round of telephone town halls that reached 77,000 Albertans.
Order, 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 order. Order, order, order. The Honourable, the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like I was saying, the first round of telephone town halls is done, the first round of engagement. I look forward to having a meeting with Mr. Dinning and the panel to discuss what he's heard so far, what they think next steps should be. We've also been clear that we think it's important to get this opinion from the Chief Actuary. I intend to find out from Minister Freeland in mid-December how that's progressing.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West has a question.
Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has brought forward a so-called Pension Protection Act that does anything but. That's right. He continues to gamble with a rigged deck while trying to run roughshod over Albertans' retirement security. His legislation provides no guarantee of a referendum, no guarantee that a referendum result would be binding, and no guarantee that any information about any pension vote would be accurate. Minister, my question is, shouldn't we just call this bill the Pension Deception Act?
Hey, hey. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Bill 2 does 4 things. It's a very basic bill. It ensures that Albertans know that if any government, this one or a future government, were to proceed, that it would need to go through a referendum. It also makes clear that the asset withdrawal can only be used for the setup and operation of an Alberta pension plan. And it lets them know that the benefits would have to be the same or higher, or the contribution rate would have to be the same or less. I think it speaks to what we're trying to do, having this conversation with Albertans. If they want it,
The Honourable, the member for Lethbridge West.
Well, the government is playing Russian roulette with Albertans' retirement security, and we can't even get a straight answer out of them. But people have been writing to us for months. 37,000 plus have filled out our online pension survey. Hundreds are attending our town halls. Just this morning, they ran out of chairs in St. Albert. So can the minister tell us, for the record, how many Albertans he's heard from and how many of those are opposed to him gambling away our pensions? Does he even check his voicemail or his inbox?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we talk to Albertans every darn day, and that will always continue. This engagement wasn't meant to rush us towards a conclusion, Mr. Speaker. It was meant to be out there where we were giving the best information possible. If the chief actuary comes back with an opinion, we'll come back to Albertans with new information if that exists. That's what this is about, proceeding in the most honest way possible.
The Honourable the member for Lethbridge West.
Well, the Premier said she took the pension gamble off the table during the election campaign, but now her UCP government, just 6 months in, is doubling down. We're even hearing from longtime UCP members wondering why the government would gamble away the pensions they worked their whole lives for. So can the minister stand right now, look at the camera right there over my shoulder, apologize directly to the people that voted for him, and promise to keep the UCP's hands off their CPP?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm well aware that member knows where all the cameras are. We are very steady in our commitment to Albertans. Once again, how would any responsible government proceed with obviously a complicated initiative? Release the report, engage, increase awareness, find ways that Albertans can participate, discuss what it potentially could look like, seek clarity and participation from the feds involving the chief actuary, come back to them if the information changes. It's good government.
Order. The Honourable member for Calgary, Bular McCall.
This week, we learned that the Premier close friends in Take Back Alberta are currently being investigated by Election Alberta. Ensuring that all election laws are followed closely and obeyed by all Canadian parties, third parties, is a critical role of this legislature and one of the top roles of government. Take Back Alberta is a group with close ties with the government and members opposite. Has any member of the government been interviewed in this investigation? Yes or no?
The Honourable the Government House Leader is risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise on behalf of the government and answer this question. Being that it is not really about government policy at all, which seems to be something that is par for the course of the members opposite, using this time, the people's time in this chamber, to ask questions as His Majesty the Lord's opposition. What I will say, though, Mr. Speaker, given this opportunity to rise, is how proud I am of this government, in particular of our amazing announcement with Dow Chemical yesterday, with billions of dollars of investment, Mr. Speaker, in this province, that I guarantee there's more to come.
The Honourable order. The Honourable member for Calgary, Bular McCall.
Premier broke the Conflict of Interest Act, which was discovered by an independent officer of the legislature. This House should understand and respect the rule of law and the independent officer of this legislature.
Yes.
The investigation into ties between the government and Take Back Alberta should be conducted independently and without partisan interference.
That's right.
Can the Minister of Justice confirm that the government caucus has the policy to fully comply with the request from independent officer and with this investigation?
Order. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the members opposite, we respect the independence and the decision-making process of the independent offices, including the offices of Elections Alberta. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite have no idea what they want. On one hand, they argue that they want independence. On the other,
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, they argue for government intervention and interference. Make up your minds, Mr. Speaker. That's all we ask of this opposition. Thank you.
Calgary, Bular McCall.
Mr. Speaker, all we are asking the government is to follow the law.
Yeah.
And this government has a tangled history with Election Alberta and investigations.
Yes.
A former member was fined tens of thousands of dollars for violating election laws. It was 4 years ago to the month that the UCP fired election commissioner investigating their leadership fraud. So
Order. The Honourable the Member.
Can the Minister of Justice assure this House that the government won't repeat history and again fire the election commissioner while this or any investigation is ongoing?
That's right. Follow the law.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member opposite for the question, and I'd like to answer that through you. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this chamber knows Elections Alberta and the officer investigating this is an independent officer in this side of the House. We will not be getting involved in that. But what I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, is now that I'm on my feet, it is a great time that while the members opposite like to chide the Minister of Finance, today's a great day, Mr. Speaker, to celebrate a $5.5 billion surplus in our province because the fiscal restraint we have shown to take the government and will continue to take government and defend Alberta's best interests because that's what we were elected to do, Mr. Speaker.
The order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore.
It is nice to see that the Premier has convinced some of her colleagues that climate change is real. Now that the UCP has finally recognized science, they must be aware that recent studies found that methane emissions are usually poorly tracked and historic data is deeply flawed. As Alberta's delegation will learn this week at COP, the world is moving towards a goal of less than 0.2% leaks of natural gas. Knowing this, will the minister commit to reducing methane further by adopting international targets?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As in our announcement just earlier this week, we were able to reiterate Alberta's leadership when it comes to methane emissions reduction. We absolutely know that there isn't one way across jurisdictions of measurement. That's why we take a top-down and a bottom-up approach. I was pleased to say that we reached our target of 45% emissions reduction, years ahead of schedule, with savings, Mr. Speaker, upwards of $600 million to industry by working with them and not against them.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore.
Given that the NDP's climate leadership plan developed methane reduction instruments, implemented the coal phase-out, and created carbon pricing that the UCP embraced, and even increased the industrial carbon tax to $170 a ton, that is their policy, and given that the UCP is trying to take credit for the NDP climate policies that led to the largest emission reductions in Alberta's electricity system, which UCP policies were specifically implemented in the last 4 years that lowered emissions? Good.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's proud and storied history when it came to emissions reduction didn't begin in 2015 with light bulbs, shower heads, and a carbon tax that increased the cost of living for Albertans right across the province, even though the opposition thinks that it did. In fact, most Albertans would say it was interrupted. In 1971, Alberta was the first province in Canada to establish a department focused on environmental protection. In the early 1990s, Mr. Speaker, we became the first oil and gas producing province to put restrictions on emissions from flaring. From 1996 to 2014, natural gas flaring in Alberta was reduced by 63%, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore.
Given that Alberta's emissions have declined due to the Alberta NDP climate policies that created the Renewables Electricity Program, which set a record low price for renewables and attracted over $5 billion in investments, and given that this government has done is put a renewables moratorium and is musing.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Glenmore.
And is now musing about nationalizing electricity assets. Can the Premier explain how a Crown corporation and nationalizing our electricity system 15 years from now help Albertans today lower their power bills?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to put a carbon price on industrial emissions back in 2007, and in 2010, we introduced renewable fuel standards regulation. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. However, I will say this. The difference between us and the NDP is we're also honest with Albertans about the costs of these changes. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, I hope they actually do want to talk about electricity and policies that would be bad for everyday people right across our province. Support us in opposing the federal Liberals' 2035 net zero power grid and stand up for affordable, reliable electricity.
Order, order. The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta is the land of opportunity and prosperity. It is a land known for its pro-growth and low-tax environment. Over the last year, Mr. Speaker, we saw billions of dollars in investments and thousands of jobs created. Earlier today, Minister of Finance released the Q2 fiscal update. To the Minister, can you please give my constituents of Drayton Valley Devon an update on how our government is keeping Alberta's finance on track?
The order, the Honourable the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you. This is important. Listen up over there. So, Mr. Speaker, what we did today was great news for Alberta. Everyone in this House, all Albertans, it shows that we're definitely on track with Alberta's finances. A $3.2 billion increase from budget, projecting now a $5.5 billion surplus in this fiscal year. It shows that we're sticking to our fiscal framework and our fiscal rules. We're staying within our budgeted contingency, although that's been difficult with wildfire. But a great news about low taxes, pro-growth, and Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that the government's priority is to spend responsibly, and given that the new fiscal framework requires the government to use at least half of available surplus cash to pay down debt, and furthermore, given that the world continues to face high inflation rates, can the Minister please tell this House what this means for the province and how it will affect the bottom line?
Honourable the Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Great question. Debt servicing is extremely relevant. Everyone knows that's tried to refinance their mortgage. It's no different for the province. I'm so grateful that we were able to pay down over $13 billion in the last fiscal year. If we had to refinance that at today's interest rates, it would mean about $600 million every year going forward. That's why this is so important. We will not be able to pay down debt every year, but every year that we can, we certainly should. The fiscal framework allows us to do that while providing some flexibility with the Alberta Fund.
The Honourable Member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for all his hard work keeping Alberta's... Given that we continue to project to lead the country in economic growth again this year, and further given that the government is turning its focus to developing next year's budget, to the Minister, please highlight how this fiscal update shows strength in Alberta's finance and economy, will position us for the further growth, and what this means for the budget 2024.
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Well, I think what it shows is that Alberta's on a good path, especially when you compare us to the fall economic statement of the federal government, where they're seeing a decrease in corporate income taxes of $14.5 billion within their fiscal year. What we're seeing is a combination of things that is added to our surplus. About $1.8 billion increase from budget in both corporate income tax and personal income tax. Speaking to the investment attraction and people voting with their feet and becoming Albertans, and $1.3 billion in NRR, even with oil's.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View is next.
This week, the CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator, Mr. Pusher, appeared in front of a House of Commons committee to answer questions about multiple incidents involving the Kearl Oil Sands facility. In addition, Albertans found out that an incident at Suncor's Fort Hills facility released more contaminated water than was initially understood. Albertans are rightly concerned, but at the committee, all Mr. Pusher did was evade questions and accountability. Does this government really think that a man who isn't doing his job deserves the $115,000 raise they gave him?
Oh my. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Mr. Speaker, the AER did address these issues. We've spoken to them a number of times in this House, but I want to be clear that the comments made by the opposition over the last week have been disgusting and unacceptable. We have heard appalling falsehoods saying water was laced, Mr. Speaker, insinuating water was intentionally poisoned. This is unbecoming of a public servant. Mr. Speaker, I would love to hear the Leader of the Opposition apologize to the public for these completely and utterly false claims and the fear that they have been creating for Albertans.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View.
Given the Auditor General found that the AER has failed to properly clean up oil and gas wells and says that the polluter pay principle is at risk, and given that a recent U of C paper concluded that the AER is too secretive and that the inability to clean up wells is a, quote, massive policy failure, and given that the government's only solution is to saddle Albertans with $20 billion in debt, the AER is failing at its function. It has lost the public trust. Will a minister commit to a proper, transparent, public review?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy and Minerals.
Mr. Speaker, the AER works at arm's length from this government. It's independent. That might be something different than the NDP wanted and did in their government time. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a world-class regulator, and the men and women that work in this regulator are known to be the best in the world. Now, Mr. Speaker, what this party on the other side has done by saying drinking water is possibly...
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, what this party opposite is doing by suggesting that drinking water is unsafe is irresponsible and unacceptable. They should stand to their feet right now and apologize to Albertans, Mr. Speaker.
Order, order, order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Given the AER has failed on multiple occasions to notify nearby communities when toxic chemicals leaked into groundwater, and given that the AER has failed to protect taxpayers and left them on the hook for corporate liabilities, does the minister truly believe that the appropriate response to a series of epic failures is a sole source secret review that is hidden from the public and giving the CEO a $115,000 raise?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy and Minerals.
Mr. Speaker, the AER works for the people of Alberta. It doesn't work for me and it doesn't work for them. It works for the people of Alberta to keep the energy industry safe, to make sure our water and air is safe. Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, the AER works hard, and the people within it work hard independently from this government to deliver for Albertans. But what this party is doing is irresponsible, suggesting that our drinking water is unsafe. That is unacceptable. They should stand up and apologize right now, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Premier put forward a motion to nationalize the provincial electricity system. This can't be too shocking. We already know that this Premier wanted to use $20 billion to nationalize cleaning up oil well sites in the province with her R-Star scam. The UCP tried to nationalize the pipeline business, wasting $1.3 billion on a leg of the Keystone XL that doesn't connect to anything. And now, despite their catastrophic failures, they want Albertans to trust them to nationalize and run the entire electricity system. Who are they fooling?
The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Currently, we're fooling the NDP who can't follow the legislation or the motion. We're doing no such thing. We are making sure that we put a structure in place to fully protect our electricity system from a classic overreach by the federal Liberal government, with the NDP party supporting that. We are making sure we protect the Constitution of Canada, the jurisdiction of this province, the consumers within this province, and its generators. We are making sure that people have lights on and that it's affordable now and into the future.
Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
Overreach sounds like intervention, given that this government's previous interventions caused a collapse in the lab system in Calgary and saw Albertans unable to buy Tylenol, and given that they already found the renewable sector so complicated, their only solution was to shut it down. Talk about not being able to chew gum and govern at the same time. And given that the Albertans have already said loud and clear they don't trust this Premier or government to run their pensions, is the Premier just crossing her fingers and hoping that this time her interventions will work? What industry is she going to take over next?
The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Lord, I'm proud to stand with a caucus and a government that is here to protect Albertans. We're making sure that we do the work that the NDP failed to do when they did an early transition away from coal to go to renewables. They didn't understand the characteristics of location change. They didn't understand the characteristics of line load change. They didn't understand the characteristics that all of these things change with intermittency and lack of reliability. We're going back and doing the work that they failed to do to make sure that Albertans have reliable and affordable electricity now and into the future.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
Protecting sounds like micromanaging, and given that we are in the midst of an affordability crisis, and given that the Premier admitted that it was the decision of her government that caused utility bills to skyrocket, and given that even the hint of nationalization will drive away investment and drive up power bills, will she look at her track record and finally put the needs of Albertans before her need to micromanage every sector in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Affordability and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to say that after we began the inquiry on August 3rd, Alberta Electric Systems Operator received 74 new applications from wind and solar projects. Wow. Investment is increasing in this province because the industry sees that they have a government that's responsible, that is going to make the system work, and we're going to have generation that we will not only be able to provide all of our needs in an affordable, reliable way, but we'll be able to help our neighbours to the east, to the west, and to the south. That's what a responsible government does, and I'm proud to stand with every member in this chamber for Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under our government, Alberta is once again the best place to live, work, and raise a family. This is why we've seen so many people bringing their families and businesses to Alberta. But my constituents have been raising concerns about our health care system. Our United Conservative government has seen and heard their concerns, and we've been working hard on a solution. Can the Minister of Health please explain the recently announced changes to AHS and what they will do to improve health care?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. We need to refocus the system so Albertans get the right care when and where they need it. At the same time, we need to ensure health professionals have the right tools and the right infrastructure to properly care for Albertans. This refocused system will centre on 4 priority sectors: primary care, acute care, continuing care, and mental health and addictions. It's a made-in-Alberta structure that keeps the best parts of a large single provider while also emphasizing areas of importance. With these changes, Albertans will have access to more effective care and improved frontline service delivery.
The order. The Honourable Member for Airdrie East is the only one to call.
Mr. Speaker, given that this is great news for Airdrie, because Airdrie is one of the fastest growing cities in all of Canada, and the existing urgent care centre is not meeting the needs of our local population. And further, given that Airdrie's growth isn't stopping anytime soon, and our urgent care facility is already well over capacity, can the Minister please tell my constituents what's being done in Airdrie to address our health concerns?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognize that Airdrie is a growing community with growing healthcare needs. We also recognize the importance of modern infrastructure in supporting these healthcare needs and the effective, efficient delivery of health services. Building health infrastructure takes time, careful planning, and strategic investment, and this infrastructure must be based on the assessed needs of the community. I'm pleased to tell you that we are planning a regional health centre in Airdrie, North Calgary, and have budgeted in 2023 $3 million for this work, Mr. Speaker. Great news for the City of Airdrie.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie East.
Mr. Speaker, that is great news, given that my constituents often have health care needs that are immediate and sometimes life-threatening, and further given that currently the people of Airdrie either have to deal with the long wait times at the urgent care centre or travel into Calgary to get to a hospital. Minister, can you please share a timeline for when my constituents can expect to see some results?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the member for the question. In addition to my previous answer, this morning I had the privilege of meeting with Mayor Brown, the Mayor of Airdrie, and his team, and we had a great discussion about addressing both urgent care and primary care needs in and around the Airdrie area. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate their passion and innovative ideas and their willingness to work together. Mr. Speaker, I see great things in the future for Airdrie and the surrounding area, so Mr. Speaker, I will share more as I have more information to share.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverview.
Only 14% of Canadians about to retire have the financial confidence to do so. This number is worryingly low. Canadians simply don't have personal financial retirement security. Sadly, the UCP thinks the way to fix this is by gambling away Alberta's pensions. If one thing is clear, Canadians cannot risk losing their CPP. Why is it that the minister thinks Albertan pensions are fun money to be spent in any way the Premier pleases? Does he understand pulling out of the CPP will hurt all Canadians' retirement security?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, President, Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is right about one thing. This is Albertans' money. This isn't the government's money. This is their net contributions that have helped grow the CPP fund. You know, and thank God that they did. You know, we're seeing that we're one of only 3 net contributors contributing in an outsized way to this plan. What the LifeWorks report shows is that at that asset withdrawal number, it has the potential to leave $5 billion every year in the pockets of Albertans, in pockets of Alberta businesses.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverview.
Given that nearly half of Canadians have had to use retirement savings to pay for other expenses, a number that has not been helped by the UCP in their careless financial decisions, and given that most Albertans don't see the financial benefits the Premier reserves for her retirement-age friends, will the minister apologize to every Albertan who has been forced to dip into their retirement savings to pay for essentials because life under the UCP is way too expensive?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, no one would be bringing this forward if it didn't have the potential to make life better for Albertans. What are we even talking about? The potential to leave $5 billion in the Alberta economy? The capacity within that $5 billion to do multiple things, potentially increase benefits while lowering the contribution rate? Like, who are you fighting for? I will advocate for Albertans every day of the week, even with a complicated scenario like this. This is about Alberta.
Order, the honourable member.
73% of households near retirement face a real risk of financial hardship, and given that life under the UCP is expensive, utility bills, rents, groceries, auto insurance, property taxes, all up due to the UCP. And given that Albertans are now facing inflation isolation while their dreams of a secure retirement slip away, will the minister be working to address financial insecurity for seniors, or will Albertans be left to fend for themselves in the wake of 4 years of bad UCP policy?
The Honourable the Minister of Seniors Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear the NDP don't like Alberta. That's not a secret, Mr. Speaker, and how they're just not proud of our province. I'm proud of our province, Mr. Speaker. We have the lowest senior poverty rate anywhere in this country, Mr. Speaker. The highest senior benefits of any province in this country, Mr. Speaker. And if there are any challenges when it comes to senior payments, Mr. Speaker, it comes from the federal government, Mr. Speaker, that party has stood up each and every time to support, Mr. Speaker. This side of the House, we stand with Albertans, including seniors. That side of the House, the NDP, they stand with Justin Trudeau. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker.
Order, the honourable member for Fort Saskatchewan, Baggerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I joined the Premier in Fort Saskatchewan as Dow Chemical announced a $9 million investment in my riding, Alberta's industrial heartland, to build its landmark Path to Zero project. This is a massive announcement that will create thousands of high-paying jobs and help Alberta enhance its position as a leader in clean technology and sustainable resource development. To the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, how will this landmark project help Alberta reach its emissions reduction goals?
Great question. Honourable members, a point of order is noted at 2:20. 28, the Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member for her advocacy and for this great question. The Dow project shows that investors and companies are choosing Alberta as the global hub for emissions reduction technology and innovation. The Fort Saskatchewan plant will become the world's first carbon-neutral petrochemical project right here in Alberta. Amazing. We're keeping people working while reducing emissions. This project does this through technologies like CCS and clean hydrogen, all areas where Alberta is leading the world. This is all part of our emissions reduction and energy development plan, which leads the way through technologies, innovation, not taxes or anti-development.
The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan-Bagotville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that this landmark announcement from Dow Chemical is further evidence that our government has restored Alberta's investment climate, which members across the aisle nearly destroyed, and given that our government's petrochemical incentive program played a critical role in facilitating this $9 billion investment, to the Minister of Energy and Minerals, what does this announcement say to other international energy and petrochemical companies who are thinking about investing in Alberta and Alberta's industrial heartland?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy and Minerals.
Well, it's true, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Alberta's NDP mothership in Ottawa is free-falling from orbit with their two co-pilots and just disastrous policy like the plastics ban that won't work. We're creating the first net-zero polyethylene cracker in the world, Mr. Speaker. The largest polyethylene cracker in the world, Mr. Speaker. And we're doing it right here in Alberta with Albertans, Mr. Speaker. 5,000, 6,000 construction jobs, 500, 600 permanent jobs, Mr. Speaker. There is so much more to come. Alberta, if you want to work or play or invest, it's the place to come, Mr. Speaker.
Order, the Honourable the Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the members across the aisle have laughably tried to take credit for this massive announcement, and even though the 38% tax hike they were promising in the last election would have killed investment in every corner of this province, and given the same members have been fear-mongering about how our government's actions standing up against Justin Trudeau and the Liberal NDP alliance will scare away investment, to the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, why does major international investments keep coming to our province despite the best efforts of the angry socialists on the other side of the aisle?
Order, the Honourable Member of Jobs, the Economy and Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Honourable Member is highlighting the stark contrast between the NDP's investment repulsion strategy and our UCP government's investment attraction strategy. You see, the NDP increased taxes, increased regulatory burden, and we're openly anti-energy and anti-business. We reduce taxes, we reduce red tape and regulatory burden, and we are champions of business in our world-class energy sector. And we've brought in billions of investment. Well, they chased away tens of billions, but guess what? 10 billion just came back this week with Dow, and you're going to see a lot more from this business-friendly government.
Order, the Honourable Member for Calgary Northeast.
The residents of Redstone have been looking at the future school site signs on empty fields for so many years. Yes. The kids travel for an hour one way each day to school and back. Shame. This government has not committed to building any schools in growing communities like Redstone. Wow. Why does the Education Minister continue to ignore Northeast Calgary?
Why? The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's completely false. Alberta's government does not ignore Northeast Calgary. In fact, I went there personally to talk with members of the community.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, I went there personally to talk with residents of the community to understand their concerns. Our government is absolutely committed to building schools. In the last budget cycle, we approved 11 projects for the City of Calgary. I know that the Redstone Elementary project that maybe the member is referring to is number 3 on Calgary Board of Education's capital list.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Northeast.
Given that the parents waited for 2 hours in chilly cold to listen from this minister and handed the signed petition of 1,100 signatures from the Redstone residents. But given that the minister still refused to commit to the new school in Redstone, can the minister tell this House how long will he make Northeast Calgary families wait for him to build the actual school in Northeast?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Well, as I informed the members of the community, which they completely understood, but for some reason the member opposite doesn't understand is that there is a process and projects have to move through that process, and new projects are awarded and announced in the capital budget process. We'll have some more information in the upcoming budget about which school projects are ready to proceed, which ones require a little bit more development. But I'm always happy anytime, Mr. Speaker, to sit down with the residents of Northeast Calgary and hear their concerns.
The honourable member for Calgary Northeast.
Given that the other communities like Cityscape, Cornerstone, Livingston are expanding and we need the new schools there as well, I will ask the simple question one more time. When will the minister replace the future school site signs from the empty fields with actual schools?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
As I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, our government is absolutely committed to significant...
The Honourable the Minister.
You know, they're quite angry, Mr. Speaker, but if the project is such a priority, why didn't they build it when they were in government? Clearly not a priority when they were in government, but it's absolutely important for our government to make sure that we are building schools in our growing communities. Over the past 4 years, we have approved 98 school projects, and we are continuing that work, Mr. Speaker. And I'll reiterate again, I'm very happy to visit the member's constituency at any time and talk to his residents.
Order the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre. Oh, no, go ahead if it's, my list could be wrong too. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, in my riding of Edmonton Southwest, there is a grave public safety issue at the Anthony Henday interchange at 184th Street and Muskogee Trail. For months, my constituents have written to the Transportation Minister pleading to fix a serious design flaw that has led to many crashes. Had he acted when I wrote to him back in July, a serious crash that happened this past Sunday could have been prevented. What is it going to take for the minister to take the safety of Albertans seriously?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I tell the member that he can tell his residents that we just made a huge announcement on the Anthony Henday Ring Road in the southwest. We went from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. That's going to improve the flow of traffic in that region. It was a $100 million project, wow. Mr. Speaker, 18 kilometers of going from 2 to 3 lanes, and that's really going to improve not just the commutes of people in that area, but it's also going to make it a lot safer.
The Honourable the Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Given that the residents of Cameron Heights want to be listened to and taken seriously by this minister, and given that all they want is a solution to prevent fatal collisions in their neighborhood, and given that the minister has yet to address their concerns, will the minister stop being so dismissive of Cameron Heights residents, take them seriously, and act in their best interest? Or is the minister only going to do something once someone dies?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, that's a terrible question. It's something that obviously as a Minister of Transportation we take traffic safety extremely seriously. That's why we review any accidents that happen, Mr. Speaker. If there's signage improvement, redesign improvements, anything that we can do from the department's standpoint is something that we'll always constantly do and work with municipalities across the province to make sure that our roads in Alberta are the safest that they can be. But Mr. Speaker, over-the-top rhetoric like that is just disgusting to hear, and I wish the member opposite would stop doing that.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Given that there have been at least 7 serious collisions at this intersection since I first wrote to the minister in July, and given that numerous Cameron Heights residents have given the minister specific solutions to reduce serious collisions, and given that both I and the local city councillor wrote to the minister last week to highlight the urgency of this issue, will the minister finally sit down for a meeting with me and Cameron Heights residents to figure out a solution, or does he not care about the lives of my constituents?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation. Point of order is noted at 2:38.
Mr. Speaker, I gave the member an opportunity to actually fix his questions. The fact that he said that I obviously don't care about his constituents is just appalling and wrong, and I wish that that new member stops those kind of questions in the future. But Mr. Speaker, in the southwest part of this city. We did a $100 million improvement to the road network for residents in that area. Residents in that area, it was built back in 2006 for about 40,000 commuters. It's gone up to about 80,000 commuters, Mr. Speaker. We're making sure that the growth of this great city is something that we can live up to and make sure that we have the investments to go for.
The honourable member for Calgary-Lougheed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Business is booming again in Alberta. Alberta's economy is leading the nation in economic growth, and because of that, families are moving from across the nation to our amazing province to partake in the Alberta Advantage. A constituent of mine owns a salon and has noticed rising labour demands as she has struggled to meet considering the high-quality results she strives for in her business. Could the Minister of Advanced Education please share what the government is doing to ensure that apprenticeship graduates are skilled and prepared to enter industries such as my constituents?
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's economy is rapidly evolving and our government is helping students get the skills and knowledge they need to meet the labour market demands of tomorrow. Alberta delivers 47 apprenticeship education programs in the skilled trades, and we have more than 900 apprenticeship scholarships every year. We also work with organizations like Women Building Futures, Careers and Skills Canada, Alberta, to promote skilled trades and showcase rewarding opportunities for our ambitious Albertans.
For Calgary-Lougheed.
Speaker, and to the Minister for her answer. Given that our government has invested an additional $12.4 million in apprenticeship training, which will create nearly 2,000 more apprenticeship spots across the province, and further given that our UCP government has been committed to investing in Albertans by expanding apprenticeship opportunities to meet the fast-rising demand for skilled workers, could the same Minister please tell the House about the integral nature of investing in our trade schools and apprenticeships?
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you for that great question. Mr. Speaker, the contributions of skilled trades workers are felt in every region of our province, and apprenticeships are the cornerstone of their education. That's why we've invested $54.4 million for apprenticeship education this year alone. And this will create nearly 2,000 apprenticeship seats across the province, ensuring there is space for everyone who chooses to pursue a rewarding, in-demand career in the trades.
Honourable member.
Given that stories like those of my constituents corroborate the fact that we need to invest in our trade schools and apprenticeships to ensure quality education is provided and to produce high-level future business owners, and further given that the UCP government was elected on a platform that is committed to recognizing and expanding trade-related fields and expanding apprenticeships to meet the fast-rising demand for skilled workers, could the same minister please expand on proposed legislation such as Bill 203 that aims to addressing increased labour shortages and demands?
The Honourable the Minister.
Another good question, Mr. Speaker. Our government is taking action to address labour shortages and enable skilled newcomers to grow our economy. Our Labour Mobility Act is making it easier for new Albertans to bring their expertise, regardless of where in Canada they received their credentials. The Fair Registration Practices Act and Fairness for Newcomers Office is supporting internationally trained skilled workers begin careers in regulated professions and trades. We know that when Albertans reach their full potential, it benefits our economy, communities, and the entire province.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In 30 seconds or less, we will continue with the remainder of the daily routine.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions. Notices of motions.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move Government Motion 14 on the order paper. Be it resolved that pursuant to Standing Order 4.1 and for the duration of the 2023 fall sitting of the first session of the 31st Legislature, the Assembly shall meet on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings for the consideration of government business, unless the Government House Leader notifies the Assembly that there shall be no evening sitting that day by providing notice under notices of motions in the daily routine or at any time prior to 6 p.m.
I will clarify with the clerk, but I believe that you need to move the motion at the calling of orders of the day. Notice of motions would have been you providing an oral notice or otherwise of some other motion. We will do this again in 30 seconds or less by all likelihood. Are there other notices of motions? The clerk.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
The honourable member for Chestermere Strathmore, followed by the Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table the Red Deer Advocate article titled Rural Municipalities Call for a Bigger Role in Energy Project Approvals. The article describes 8 recommendations made by an RMA committee to the AUC and the EER, which includes a call to include public interest evaluation frameworks within these organizations' approval projects.
The Minister of Advanced Education has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to table the requisite 5 copies of an open letter to Premier Smith in support of free use of the software engineer title. Notably, this letter was signed by the member from Calgary Foothills, and thank you, alongside numerous other representatives of the tech sector.
I believe there may have been the use of a member's name, which would be wildly inappropriate, but the Honourable Minister of Forestry and Parks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table a document here further to a question from yesterday in question period. We have 611 people working in wildfire management along with resources like aircraft and heavy equipment operators. Thank you.
Thank you for your tabling. Are there others? Looks like the Honourable Member for Edmonton Decor would like to rise.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would like to table an email from Linda Lindsay, is a constituent of mine, concerned resident about the CBB with anxiety and uncertainty that it will bring. So I have 5 copies of that for the record.
Are others? The honourable member for Banff Kananaskis, followed by Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, when debating Bill 202, the education classrooms data piece, I quoted from letters from the Foothills School Division and Rockyview Schools Division. I just want to table requisite copies of those letters now.
Member for Edmonton Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a requisite number of copies of the article, the information I referred to during the QPs yesterday when the Honourable Minister of Infrastructure started explaining the P3s and its fancy benefits in response to my question requesting to ban P3 bad models school projects. I'm tabling the CBC article published online on December 26, 2022, and the Minister then, infrastructure, not sure if I can state the name because the Minister is the Honourable Member.
Well, no, you can't, but you're also not, you don't need to describe everything in the article, as the purpose of tabling is it so that we can read it, but if you can be quick, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here are the copies.
Thank you. Are there others? Seeing none, the clerk.
Tablings to the clerk. I wish to advise the Assembly that the following documents were deposited with the Office of the Clerk. On behalf of Honourable Mr. Amory, Minister of Justice, pursuant to the Public's Right to Know Act, Report on Crime and Justice Statistics, 2018-19 to 2022-23. On behalf of Honourable Mr. Nally, Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction, pursuant to the Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Act, Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Commission 2022-2023 Annual Report. Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, that brings us to points of order, and it's 2:27. At 2:27, the government House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order of 23H, I, and J. Particularly in this instance, the member from Edmonton Rutherford, while the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services was speaking, said, and I believe the line was, "Were you not loved as a child?" This is language certainly to cause disorder within this chamber, and I would think that actually personal attacks are below any member, regardless of political stripe in this chamber, Mr. Speaker. I suspect it wasn't caught necessarily, it wasn't said loud enough, but maybe it was, that ambient mics caught it. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, it was heard by a number of members on this side of the House, and I would expect that member to apologize, withdraw, and refrain from using those kinds of personal and frankly offensive lines in the future.
The Deputy Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Usually during the question period, I use that earpiece, so I did not catch what member from Rutherford said. But I do agree with the House Leader that these personal attacks need to stop. Yesterday, I think we brought that up as well. Minister of Service, Alberta, he makes those kind of personal attacks and remarks. So I 100% agree with the House Leader that there shall be no personal attacks. Heckling is something different than personal attacks. So I didn't hear what was the exchange. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there others? I am prepared to rule. Fortunately or unfortunately, as it is the case for the honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford, not only did I hear her remark, as well as the Speaker is reluctant to rule without either hearing it or there being an accurate record. And in this case, I have both. And the facts as reported are entirely correct. And I might just add that immediately prior to the honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford saying, "Were you not loved as a child?" the honourable member for Edmonton Northwest said, "You're embarrassing." Both unparliamentary, both unacceptable, and I will anticipate an apology and withdrawal.
Apologize and withdraw.
Consider this matter dealt with and concluded, and I would encourage all members of the Assembly, while they may choose to engage in heckling, personal attacks of any nature are never the orders of the day. We are at point of order number 2, and at 2:53, I believe, 2:38, somewhere around there, the government House Leader rose on an additional point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly did. At this time, the member from Edmonton Southwest was asking a question to the Honourable Minister of Transportation. And I rise on 23H, I, and J. This is certainly on the record, as it was part of his question. Though I do not have the benefit of the blues, my understanding of the remark was, does he not care about the lives of the people or of these people? Mr. Speaker, I know that member. I've limited time speaking with him, but I know him to be a man of integrity. And this is a remark that I believe is probably out of character for that member. Maybe the emotion of the moment got the best of that member, but Mr. Speaker, that kind of remark suggesting that members on this side of the House, in particular, the Minister of Transportation, who is charged with the lives of those who are on our roads and streets, keeping them safe, I believe that remark is certainly out of order, causes disruption, and I would argue that it is a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The official opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the benefit of blues, but I do have the question from the member. And the question was about a grave safety issue on Anthony Henday. And member, before asking this question, has written to the minister in July, mentioning that since then there have been 7 incidents, serious incidents, and then he went on to say that went on to ask minister, will he sit with his constituents? And the word he used, or does he not care about the lives of my constituents? I think it's not a point of order. In the context, question was about safety concern on a highway that could cause Albertans' life. It was a serious question, and I don't know why the House leader thinks that that should be a point of order. I think those are the kind of concern Albertan elected us to raise in this legislature, where the safety is at risk. Member has every right to ask that question. Thank you.
Are there others? I am prepared to rule. I do have the benefit of the blues. I don't think anyone is questioning the serious nature of the question, the point of order specifically as to whether or not the honourable member for Edmonton Southwest made an allegation about the honourable Minister for Transportation. We do have a very clear record of the blues, and in fact he did say, or does he not care about the lives of my constituents? Whether or not a statement as such raises to the level of a point of order, I think is a matter that could be debated inside this chamber. I want to caution the honourable member that it sounds a lot like he may have been making an allegation about the Minister of Transportation. It also sounds a lot like he may not be speaking through the speaker. A much more appropriate way to ask the question would be, does the minister not care, as opposed to the personal of the he in this case. Having said that, we'll provide some grace to the honourable member for Edmonton Southwest, who is relatively new to the chamber. I would provide some caution for him, though, when crafting his questions, that he does so in a way that is both through the speaker and not unintentionally making an accusation that may raise the level of a point of order. This is not a point of order. I consider the matter dealt with and concluded. Orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government motions. Motion number 14, Honourable Mr. Scow.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, let's run it back and try it again. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move Government Motion 14 on the order paper, and it reads as follows. Be it resolved that pursuant to Standing Order 4.1 and for the duration of the 2023 fall sitting of the first session of the 31st Legislature, the Assembly shall meet on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings for consideration of government business unless the Government House Leader notifies the Assembly that there shall be no evening sittings that day by providing notice under notices of motions in the daily routine or at any time prior to 6 p.m.
Members, pursuant to Standing Order 4.1, this is a non-debatable motion. Having heard the motion, pursuant to the Honourable the Government House Leader, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Private bills for second reading. Bill PR1, St. Joseph's College Amendment Act 2023. Honourable Ms. Sigurdsson.
The Honourable the member for Edmonton Riverview has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move second reading of Bill PR1, St. Joseph's College Amendment Act 2023. I just will share some short remarks regarding this bill. And we know that St. Joseph's College is a very proud institution on the campus of the University of Alberta, and I have the honour of being the MLA for Edmonton Riverview, which is where both the University of Alberta and St. Joseph's College are situated. And since 1926, so almost 100 years, St. Joe's College, as it's affectionately known, has served students on the campus for all those years. They teach on an annual basis over 70 courses in the liberal arts tradition, from using the Catholic religion, the lens through which they teach those courses. They have approximately 2,700 students that enroll annually in the courses. 10 tenured professors and roughly 20 adjunct professors. They have 2 chapels with religious services in the Catholic tradition for nearly 300 members on campus, along with campus ministry supports for students. They also provide space for religious expressions for Coptic Orthodox and Ukrainian. So this amendment that's presented here before the House today, if passed, will allow St. Joe's College, as it's affectionately known, to offer diplomas and degrees. The amended legislation will also update the board composition to be in line with the academic institutions governed under the Post-Secondary Learning Act and create a Senate. The affiliation with the University of Alberta will not change under this legislation, and the University of Alberta, as we know, is a world-class public research university. President Flanagan of the U of A wrote a letter of endorsement for this legislation. Certainly, St. Joe's has a very long, proud history, and people who have attended St. Joe's are people that we know, and certainly we know that our own retired member, Richard Feehan, took courses at St. Joe when he was first enrolled at university, and Joe Clark, former Prime Minister of Canada, lived in the men's residence at St. Joe's, and we also know that our current Justice Kevin Feehan also took courses at St. Joe's. So there's political leaders that have attended that, and many, many more that I won't go into details about. But certainly the ability for St. Joe's to now grant degrees, update their boards, and create a Senate will put them in line with other institutions, as I said, under the PSLA here in our province, and it will give them much more of a mandate to attract students, and certainly they have a very credible history, and I just urge all members of this Assembly to vote in favor of this legislation, because this will be a real asset for all Albertans, because people come from all across our country, all across our province, certainly even Western Canada. And a lot of people like this sort of smaller structure, the more community-focused sort of atmosphere of St. Joe's, and certainly many people from rural Alberta have taken their first steps at university, going first to St. Joe's College and then going on to other academic pursuits. So again, I just urge all members of this Assembly to vote in favor of this bill. I think it's going to really serve the students of Alberta. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'll take my seat.
Perfect. Are there any other members that wish to join the debate on Bill PR1 in second reading? Seeing none, would the mover like to close?
Well, thank you. I just would, again, like to thank everybody for looking at this legislation, and I think it's really a positive move forward, and again, urge everyone to support. Thank you.
Honourable members, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview has moved second reading of Bill PR1, St. Joseph's College Amendment Act 2023. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for second reading? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
Bill PR1, St. Joseph's College Amendment Act 2023 is now read a second time. Committee of the Whole.
Oh, sure. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Do I move this motion for unanimous consent before or once we're in committee? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prior to going to Committee of the Whole, I rise to ask for unanimous consent for 1-minute bells in Committee of the Whole, including on the first division.
Having heard that motion, it's a unanimous consent motion. Is there anyone opposed? Please say so now. So granted.
Committee of the Whole.
members, I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 5, the Public Sector Employers Amendment Act 2023. This is the first time we are hearing this in Committee of the Whole. Are there any members that wish to join the debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I just want to take a few minutes today as we consider Bill 5, which is titled Public Sector Employers Amendment Act 2023, to do a brief reminder of how we ended up in this place in which the government has taken this opportunity to focus on increasing already large compensation for executive leadership positions. Particularly, I want to focus on post-secondary institutions, Madam Chair. So in 2018, I think it was well aware that there were a number of executive positions in the province that were being paid far in excess of any other comparators across Canada. In fact, any other comparators across North America. The president at the University of Alberta at that time took home $960,000 in compensation, direct compensation, and as has been highlighted by colleagues, my colleague for Edmonton, Goldbar, who was a minister at the time, there was also additional compensation built in through a number of strategic initiatives, including the purchase of a home that had previously been purchased and which the government significantly increased, or not the government, the board of the day at the University of Alberta significantly paid more than what the president had just paid a few years earlier for the house. So the compensation that year was far in excess of $1 million for the president at the University of Alberta. At the same time, oil was around $20 a barrel. We all know that there were fiscal realities and constraints in the province. But no matter what the price of oil, no president as amazing as the university is, and it is my alma mater for two of my degrees, through you, Madam Chair, needs to be paid $1 million. It is absolutely something that students, I think, rejected in a significant way. Other academics at the university rejected in a significant way, and I know that generally taxpayers across Alberta were gobsmacked to know that that was the reality. So we worked as a government strategically in 2018 over a few years to roll back that compensation to rates that were far more reasonable, still very high, but not as out of line with other major institutions across Canada and North America. So, for example, instead of $960,000 a year, the pay came down to $684,000 a year. And it was for 20 leaders at post-secondary institutions across Alberta. This is one of the things that the government has decided needs to be their top priority when it comes to this legislation. Repealing those salary bands and allowing for the gravy train to continue as it once did under former Conservative governments, under the current Conservative government. At this time, I also want to take a moment to reflect on what's happened to post-secondary tuition, domestic tuition in particular, students who are Canadian, the vast majority of whom are Albertan, who are going to post-secondary institutions in the province of Alberta. Just in the first 4 years that the UCP was governing, the 4 years prior to this, we saw domestic tuition increase from 29% to 74%, Madam Chair. And I want to acknowledge that we know that that has led to extreme increases in student debt and student debt financing. But I also want to acknowledge that there are many students, particularly lower income students who might have other pressures outside of the family that are also causing financial burden, but also students who have are lower income are less likely to be willing to take on personal debt to finance their future income earning opportunities through post-secondary investment, Madam Chair. So we've seen tuition in programs like pharmacy, dentistry, and law go up the most, meaning that we will see people from diverse economic backgrounds less likely to pursue careers in those areas because of decisions that the university had to make as a direct result to the $222 million in direct cuts to the University of Alberta alone. We've also heard from my colleague, the MLA for Edmonton South, earlier today about food bank usage and the need for financial aid for students at the University of Alberta, many of whom are accessing the food bank for themselves, but the majority of whom, in fact, are under the age of 18 either to feed themselves or their children. So as this relates directly to Bill 5, Madam Chair, I want to re-articulate that the Public Sector Employers Amendment Act does in no way address the direct impacts on students at universities who are seeing their tuition skyrocket or the cost of living increase for them. It does, however, Madam Chair, directly impact the compensation for executives who run the university. I know that other members have said that this is because of cost of living increases. I wish that members of this Assembly would focus on cost of living increases for folks who are trying to go to school, trying to pay their bills, and focus less on upping the top end of compensation for those who are already incredibly well compensated, especially when you look at interjurisdictional comparators, Madam Chair. So with that, I have to say I am disappointed by the direction this government has chosen to take, and I continue to be frustrated with the fact that they're putting the pay and compensation of those who are most executive in our systems ahead of those most in need. With that, I'll cede the remainder of my time.
Any other members that wish to join the debate on Bill 5 in Committee of the Whole? Seeing none, I will call the question on Bill 5, the Public Sector Employers Amendment Act 2023. On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. On the title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Members, we are now on Bill 6, Committee of the Whole, Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023. Are there members wishing to speak to the bill? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023, is a decisive move to strengthen the authority in our public health decisions. The idea behind Bill 6 is simple. We want decisions about public health to be made by the people elected by Albertans. The origin of Bill 6 lies in a careful consideration of the challenges faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is evident that the decision-making process regarding COVID-19 public health orders did not align with the existing legislative framework, as highlighted by the Ingram decision. If Bill 6 passes, elected representatives chosen by Albertans will ultimately have discretionary authority to make final decisions on public health orders in respect of all persons or a class of persons, including a class of individuals, bodies corporate, associations, nonprofit or for-profit organizations, all while taking into account the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health during a declared state of public health emergency. Albertans elect their MLAs and rely upon public officials to make significant decisions on their behalf. It is therefore crucial to shape Alberta's laws in a manner that facilitates elected officials making informed decisions for the well-being of all Albertans. Madam Chair, in the context of a public health crisis, it is imperative that lines of authority and responsibility remain clear and adhere to established laws. The passage of this bill will empower Cabinet to take necessary actions to mitigate the impact of public health emergencies during a declared state of public health emergency, including measures to control the spread of disease, safeguard individuals from exposure, disrupt the transmission chain, and eliminate the sources of infection. Madam Chair, we're making changes to Section 29 of the Public Health Act. This is the part of the Act that tells us who has final decision-making authority during a declared state of public health emergency. The changes make it crystal clear who does what during a declared state of public health emergency. Medical officers of health, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health, still have the final say on specific cases, but during a province-wide declared state of public health emergency, Cabinet would now have the power to make broader decisions affecting broader classes of persons, including individuals, businesses, nonprofits, and educational settings. And why do we need this? Well, it's about outputting Albertans first. We want the elected officials in charge to have the power to make decisions quickly and clearly where it matters most. The Chief Medical Officer of Health will continue to play the vital role in the public health advice, making sure that decisions are based on scientific and medical evidence, with sound public health considerations taken into account. Madam Chair, as a member of the opposition once so eloquently stated, there are other provinces in Canada where government holds the final responsibility in terms of issuing public health orders, so it's not an unprecedented step. In fact, it is a necessary stride, underlining the commitment to transparent decision-making during a declared state of public health emergency and in all circumstances. Now, let's talk about transparency. I want to reiterate to you, Madam Chair, that this is about transparency and clarity. Albertans want to know who is ultimately making the final decisions that impact their lives. Bill 6 doesn't hide anything. Section 74.1 of this bill, granting the Lieutenant Governor and Council discretionary authority to, by order, reverse or vary any public health decision of any decision maker under the Act outside of a declared state of public health emergency, further clarifies Cabinet's final decision-making authority. By incorporating that paramountcy clause, the legislation ensures that crucial decisions can be effectively made by elected officials. We saw, Madam Chair, during the COVID-19 crisis, that sometimes decisions need to be made outside or beyond a declared state of public health emergency. And this clause gives us the authority to keep people safe at all times. This underscores the accountability and transparency that elected officials must uphold, as they bear the responsibility ultimately for discretionary decisions made outside of the specific context of a declared state of public health emergency. In aligning these proposed amendments with the Ingram Court decision, Bill 6 establishes a robust foundation, ensuring our legislative framework remains not only resilient, but also adaptable to the ever-evolving nature of public health challenges. Madam Chair, Bill 6 is a statement, a testament to our dedication to transparency, accountability, and responsiveness to the needs of Albertans. Again, Madam Chair, public health is a top priority for this government, and we will always value input from the medical community. Their knowledge and advice plays an indispensable role in building a strong and reliable healthcare system for our province. As we reflect on the COVID-19 pandemic, I trust that the committee will carefully consider the merits of Bill 6 for the betterment of our province and for all of its people. With that, Madam Chair, I think I've made it clear as to why the proposed amendments are needed, and I urge each and every member to cast their vote, in favor of Bill 6. Thank you.
There are others wishing to join the debate. The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak to Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act. I'll thank the Minister for quoting me. Certainly, this is a government that is skilled in taking a rhetorical lynch and running it for several miles. Acknowledging, Madam Chair, that there are other provinces that have a similar model is in no way a ringing endorsement of many of the sweeping changes that are made in this bill. And indeed, there are some very significant concerns with some of the decisions that this government has made in bringing forward this legislation. And it's not just me that's saying so. Indeed, I'll note the minister has not quoted a single legal expert, public health expert, anyone else with knowledge or expertise in this field supporting what they are putting forward in this legislation. I will be happy to quote and put forward the thoughts of several who are raising concerns. Now, to give a bit of context, Madam Chair, this This is part of a consideration, as the minister said, of how decisions are made in the case of an emergency, and indeed based on a fairly significant impact that was had on all of us under the most recent pandemic and how those decisions were made. Now, unfortunately, what we have here in Bill 6 is not just an attempt to clarify and correct legislation. Indeed, if that was what this government wanted to do, they had multiple opportunities to do so in the midst of the pandemic when they indeed amended the Public Health Act. But they did not introduce these changes then. The minister just spoke about, how this is supposed to provide clarity on who's making decisions. Let's be clear. The government under which this minister sat were the ones who obscured that decision-making process, which is what led to the Ingram ruling, which is what led to this legislation. They obscured the fact that Cabinet was making decisions when the law clearly said that was the province of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. That was this government. So they are patting themselves on the back for doing now what they should have done years ago and could have clarified. So if there was a lack of clarity during the pandemic, that was a choice, a deliberate choice of this government. What this legislation does, Madam Chair, is it continues a pattern of this government seeking to seize unprecedented levels of control, undemocratic levels of control, Madam Chair. And I don't use that word lightly. You see, governments in general, they're afforded a pretty wide latitude of power. They're afforded an enormous level of power, and that is because they're also afforded an enormous level of responsibility. Governments are called on to make incredibly difficult decisions, at times in unpredictable, very uncertain circumstances, and so they are given a lot of power and a lot of flexibility in what decisions they make and what actions they choose to take to meet those circumstances. And in a democratic system, we seek to balance that power and authority with some appropriate checks and balances to ensure that power is not abused. Now, one of those checks and balances, of course, is all of us here, the elected members of the legislature, because, of course, the government consists of, as we all know in this chamber, the ministers and the premier. Every other MLA in this place is a private member and intended to act as a check and balance on the exercise of power by government. So even when a government holds a majority, even when there is a majority and we have more government members than opposition members, and even if those government members choose to consistently vote with their government and their ministers, at least when we have that debate here in the legislature, we at least have the opportunity for the public to see. We have transparency, we have the accountability of open debate, scrutiny of government decisions, just as we are having here and now. We also have the protection of freedom of information laws. That empowers opposition, empowers media, empowers the public to be able to hold the government accountable by keeping them informed about decisions that the government makes. All of those mechanisms, though, ultimately depend to an admittedly fairly significant extent on the assumption that those who are governing are doing so with integrity and that they are going to respect the rule of law. Now, unfortunately, in its tenure, this UCP government has repeatedly given us good reason to believe that is not the case. On repeated occasions, as I detailed in my earlier debate on this bill, we have Bill 10, the first attempt by this government to amend the Public Health Act in the early days of the pandemic, in which they chose to seize sweeping powers to not only adjust or amend or add to any existing law, but to create entirely new laws without ever setting foot in the legislature. That, Madam Chair, to me is the very definition of undemocratic. It flies in the face of public accountability. It certainly flies in the face of the kind of clarity, transparency, and accountability the Minister of Justice just claims they wish to uphold. But they flagrantly passed legislation which flouted that. They passed that bill. The Minister of Justice himself was part of that government, part of the government that voted that through. Now, of course, the other checks and balances that exist, thankfully, did work. The public spoke out loudly, as did we in opposition, and the government walked that back. But then, again, when they brought forward their Sovereignty Act last December, they did it again. Went to seek giving themselves the unprecedented power, the undemocratic power, Madam Chair, to create entirely new legislation without ever setting foot in this House. That is the record of this government. And then after that, Madam Chair, we had the case of the Premier herself, who chose to try to influence a decision of the Crown in the prosecution of a single individual, Mr. Arthur Poslowski. As the Ethics Commissioner noted, it is improper for any elected official to try to interfere with the administration of justice by interfering in a prosecution and by speaking to an Attorney General about a specific ongoing criminal case in the way that the Premier did on her call with the then Minister of Justice was not acceptable. Indeed, in her view, was a threat to democracy. That is the track record, that is the history of this government. So now we have in front of us Bill 6, where, Madam Chair, I dare say this government is seeking to do it again. As I said, I've yet to see any expert, legal or in public health, express any praise for this bill. But I am seeing several raised concerns. A recent blog post from Drs. Lorian Hardcastle and Sean Fluker, both associate professors in the Faculty of Law, the University of Calgary, Dr. Hardcastle with a joint appointment to the Department of Community Health. In her view, Bill 6 is nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction by the UCP government to judicial decisions and a seemingly superficial response to placate those who blame the Chief Medical Officer of Health for pandemic restrictions. And while it may satisfy a desire for revenge politics, Bill 6 fails to properly address the real governance problems in the Act. And I hear that a member of the government agrees. This bill fails to address the real issue on the table. Now, I'm going to begin by looking at a specific section of this Act. Talking here about section 74.1. When we again are talking about seizing unprecedented power, Madam Chair, looking to circumvent democracy, looking to circumvent the proper procedures of this House, indeed, to do an end run around the legislature. In this case, the government is seeking unprecedented power that does not exist in any jurisdiction. The Minister of Justice was happy to quote the piece where I talked about the fact that this does exist in some others. The Minister of Justice will know that section 74.1 does not exist in any other jurisdiction in Canada. That is because section 74.1 essentially gives Cabinet the ability to override anybody who has made any decision about public health at any time, without justification, without transparency, without any checks and balance. Now again, this is a power that is afforded to no other government in Canada. Now the Minister of Justice has not offered any explanation on why he feels that he has the expertise or that he and his cabinet should be able to override this. If the minister wants to rise and provide that explanation, I would certainly welcome it. I would be happy to hear it. But the fact is, this is not a power that's taken by anyone. Now, let's be clear. That means any decision that's made by public health in regards to the sort of situation we recently had with E. coli. The minister believes that Cabinet should have the ability to go in and override any decision that is made in that case, in or outside of a public health emergency. This is not something that was raised within the Ingram case. This is not something that was raised by anybody. This was not called for by anyone or raised as a concern by anyone in the field, any legal expert, any public health expert. The government has not demonstrated any reason why they need this extraordinary power. But we know that we have a track record of a government that seems to believe it deserves extraordinary power, that it deserves to hold power that no other government in Canada holds. We also know this is a government that is headed by someone who sought to interfere in the administration of justice, specifically related to public health orders. And now, the minister under that premier is seeking to give the cabinet under that premier the ability to essentially override absolutely any public health decision. There seems to be some alignment between those two cases. So a government, again, that repeatedly has tried to put itself even further above the law, that tried to rewrite the law to give itself the right to write the law without ever setting foot in this legislature, feels it needs to give itself even more extraordinary power. I had someone reach out to me who works in the public health field. Deep experience, raising concerns about this particular provision. They pointed out that public health has more to do with just pandemics and infectious disease. It has to do with, say, situations like the Domtar site here in Edmonton, where AHS Environmental Health made rulings about what needed to happen at that site, what needed to be done to contain, holding a specific company and corporation to account. Now, this government believes it should have the power to be able to interfere in that kind of a decision. A government that has demonstrated that they, at least the Premier, has been willing to attempt to interfere in those sorts of decisions to benefit a single individual. And this government wants to give itself the power now to interfere with any ruling against any individual, any corporation, any organization, with no accountability. There is accountability currently in the structure, Madam Chair. There are multiple levels within public health by which decisions get made and scrutinized. There is an appeal board. And in fact, there are the courts. But this government believes it should set itself above all of those things. A government that has repeatedly demonstrated a lack of judgment on so many of these matters. So again, a provision that does not exist in any other legislation across Canada, for which the minister has provided no justification, for a government which has shown it lacks judgment and indeed is willing to push the boundaries. So that is why, Madam Chair, I would like to introduce this amendment.
This will be known as Amendment A1. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment reads, myself to move that the Bill 6, Public Health Amendment Act 2023, be amended by striking out Section 3. Section 3 being the part that adds in 74.1. The portion for which there has been given no justification, the portion which does not exist in any other provincial legislation in Canada, portion which gives the government sweeping powers to override absolutely any public health decision made by absolutely anyone in the system. A government, I would dare say, Madam Chair, that has demonstrated it lacks the judgment to indeed be able to exercise. Albertans need to know, Madam Chair, that this government that has twice attempted to give itself the power to create entirely new legislation without ever setting foot in the legislature, twice in the space of 2 years. under a premier who directly tried to interfere in the administration of justice to benefit a single individual. That government is now once again attempting to take unprecedented power for itself that is not matched in any other jurisdiction in Canada through Section 74.1 in Bill 6, granting themselves the power to override any public health decision in the province of Alberta. On this side of the House, Madam Chair, we believe that if you want to take that kind of sweeping power, you should provide justification. You provide a reason. The minister has provided none. So we are moving this amendment and calling for Section 3 containing Section 74.1 to be removed from the legislation. I look forward perhaps to hearing the minister's thoughts on this amendment and his justification for the change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Any members wishing to speak to the amendment is recently moved? Seeing none, I will call the question. On Amendment A1 is moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That amendment is defeated. Any speakers wishing to speak to the main division has been called. Ring the bells. Well, members, the division has been called on Amendment A1. All those in favour of the amendment, please stand.
Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Wright, Honourable Mr. Sabier, Honourable Member Hoffman, Mr. Ellingson, Ms. Algenet, Mr. Ip, Honourable Ms. Sigurdsson, Ms. Goring, Mr. Dack, Member Brar.
All those opposed to the amendment, please stand.
Go slow, there's lots of them.
Honourable Mr. Guthrie, Honourable Mr. Glubish, Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Honourable Mr. Williams, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Honourable Mr. Horner, Honourable Mr. Scow, Honourable Mr. Ellis, Honourable Mr. Amory, Honourable Mr. Newdorf, Honourable Mr. Lowen, Honourable Mr. Wilson, Honourable Mr. Jean, Honourable Mr. Dreeshen, Honourable Mr. Nixon, Mr. Long, Mr. Yao, Honourable Mr. Turton, Honourable Mr. Nally, Honourable Ms. Furr, Honourable Mr. Jones, Honourable Mrs. Sawney, Mr. Getson, Honourable Mr. Sigurdsson, Honourable Mr. Yassin, Honourable Mr. Hunter, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Sear, Mr. Lunty, Mr. Boychenko, Mr. McDougall, Mr. Wright, Mrs. Petrovic, Ms. Lovely, Mr. Dick, Honourable Ms. Armstrong-Hominack, Mr. Young, Mr. Sinclair, Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Singh, and Mr. Stephan, Mrs. Johnson.
Madam Chair, total for the Amendment 11, total against 43.
Members, that amendment has been defeated. Are there any speakers wishing to speak to the bill? The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we attempted a protection of democracy. The government was not a fan, but we will see if we can try perhaps another time. When we are talking about Bill 6, the Minister of Justice rose. Yes, Madam Chair, you could say this is the UCP government's Bill 6. When we are speaking about this bill, these amendments to the Public Health Act, the Minister spoke of careful consideration of the process by which decisions were made during the pandemic. He talked about new decisions being made now by Cabinet, holding that control, taking into account the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, that would facilitate elected officials making decisions for the well-being of all Albertans. Now, of course, we know what the track record of this government has been in terms of actually taking advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health and how that worked out for the well-being of Albertans. And indeed, those are some of the concerns that Drs. Hardcastle and Fluker go on to discuss in their post, Haste Makes Waste, amending the Public Health Act on the University of Calgary's Law blog. They talk about how the debate about whether public health experts or elected officials ought to have the power to make public health decisions with general application is a serious issue. And it's certainly not resolved by simply shifting decision-making power from experts to politicians. So again, this bill does not resolve the problem. As they go on to say, the shift on its own does nothing to ensure public health orders will follow norms of predictability, consistency, transparency, justification, and accountability to the elected assembly. And indeed, Madam Chair, we must remember this was in fact the model by which decisions were made during the pandemic in Alberta. Now, it was contravening the law at that time, but it is still how the government managed things. The Chief Medical Officer of Health was not making the ultimate decisions, Cabinet was. So therefore, the function of how we saw things roll out during the pandemic was exactly under this model, and indeed this model as exercised by this government. So when Drs. Fluker and Hardcastle talk about concerns about predictability, consistency, transparency, justification, accountability, that's because those were all lacking under this government, under this model. I can tell you, staff in my office spent hours sending emails and updates to businesses across Alberta, including in many government members' constituencies, helping to clarify information that this government failed to clarify, updating people on changes being made at the last minute, being poorly communicated. Those were decisions by this government under this model that they are now seeking to entrench in law after having chosen to repeatedly contravene and flout the law during the last pandemic. Now, they go on to speak and say, if anything, shifting decision-making power to Cabinet will only exacerbate these shortcomings because of the principle of Cabinet confidentiality. And we have already seen how this will play out in the next public health emergency because indeed, Madam Chair, we saw how it played out during the last one. So we do have an ongoing concern here because, again, this bill is not actually fixing the problem. It's simply codifying the very model by which this government chose to operate during the last pandemic, which they themselves have admitted was problematic. And certainly any member of the public who had to deal with the public health restrictions under this government will tell you was problematic, again, because of their failure to communicate, their failure to provide proper supports. Because at so much of the time, these decisions were in fact being heavily politicized by their own infighting amongst their caucus. And we can say that, Madam Chair, because they were publishing open letters, arguing with themselves in the midst of a pandemic as lives were being lost. This change in this bill will do nothing to correct that fatal flaw, because that flaw lies within this government. So, unfortunately, Madam Chair, we can't fix this government. But we can perhaps help fix this legislation. As I was saying earlier, one of the things that we can do in legislation to deal with governments that demonstrate a lack of ability to respect the law, the rule of law, or indeed at times to act in the best interests of the people they are elected to serve, is to ensure we have proper checks and balances, ways to hold them accountable and at least ensure that the public is informed about their decisions and how those decisions are made. Again, from Drs. Hardcastle and Fluker, the underlying issue here is a lack of transparency in decision-making, which Bill 6 does nothing to change. In our recent paper referenced above, we conducted a cross-Canadian comparative analysis of public health legislation. And if Cabinet is going to make public health decisions, they ought to counterbalance the risk of increased politicization, for which we have had ample evidence over the last 4 years, Madam Chair. I return to the quote. Counterbalance the risk of increased politicization with greater independence for the Chief Medical Officer of Health by facilitating greater transparency of their recommendations. This way, the public can make more informed public health-related decisions and hold the government's feet to the fire if they choose not to follow the Chief Medical Officer of Health's recommendations. So again, what we have at the moment, Madam Chair, is this government codifying and re-entrenching the model by which they operated during the last pandemic, under which we had no accountability and transparency. And indeed, despite the fact that this government was the one that signed off on every single public health order, this premier, when she came into power, was the one who metaphorically put the head of the Chief Medical Officer of Health on a platter to satisfy their restive base, who she had inflamed throughout her length of her leadership campaign, blaming her and other public health officials for the decisions that were in fact made by this government, its cabinet, indeed many of the ministers who sit in this House today. And Bill 6 will not change one piece of that. None. It will continue to have the same lack of transparency, the same lack of accountability, give this government the same opportunity to continue to misrepresent to Albertans where decisions are actually being made and the basis on which they are being made. And not only in the midst of a public health emergency, which is disturbing enough, but indeed on any public health order which this government just voted against voted against any limitation on their ability to interfere in any public health order from any public health individual in this province. No accountability. Because apparently this government believes that it should have to answer to Albertans, that its decisions should be unquestioned. On this side of the House, Madam Chair, we disagree, which is why I will move this amendment.
Sorry, can you give him a copy? This will be known as Amendment A2. Honourable Member, please proceed.
So I'll read the amendment into the record. I am moving that Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023, be amended in Section 2 as follows. A, in the proposed Section 29(2.14 by adding, and a copy of any advice provided to the Lieutenant Governor in Council by the Chief Medical Officer in respect of the making of that order or exemption. Immediately after the Lieutenant Governor in Council shall provide a copy of the order or exemption. And B, by adding the following immediately after the proposed Section 29(2.15, 2.16, if the minister receives a copy of an order, exemption, or advice of the Chief Medical Officer under subsection 2.14, the minister must immediately publish a copy of that order, exemption, or advice of the Chief Medical Officer on the department's publicly accessible website. This is a very simple amendment, Madam Chair, addressing a question of accountability, the question raised by Doctors Hardcastle and Fluker, and by others. Now, indeed, the minister spoke, and he said the elected officials, the folks that are elected by Albertans, should be making all decisions on public health. If he believes that, then that same public should be informed about why this government is making its decisions and what advice was presented for it to consider. Because indeed, if the government is acting in the best interests of Albertans, they should not fear demonstrating that. If the government feels that the only way that they can act in the best interests of Albertans is for Albertans to be uninformed, I would suggest they are not acting in the best interests of Albertans. So this amendment would simply require that a copy of any advice provided to the Lieutenant Governor in Council, so to the Cabinet, by the Chief Medical Officer regarding the making of an order of an exemption be made available to the public. So the government, of course, having exercised its best judgment, as the Minister of Justice has assured us they will be able to demonstrate to the public that indeed, that as the Minister of Justice said they would, they have listened carefully to and taken into full account the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Now, of course, we know during the last pandemic, when the government was operating essentially under this model while contravening the law, they did not do so. Indeed, repeatedly, they chose to obfuscate and hide even the fact that they were making the decision. They were happy to hide behind the Chief Medical Officer of Health, even as they were actively overriding her. But the fact is, as I discussed, government is afforded incredible power. The government is now taking even further power. The check and balance on that power is transparency and accountability. Now, sadly, we do know this is a government that seeks to avoid that and to hide from that in every case. Indeed, when it comes to data about current COVID-19 infections and indeed the state of our hospitals and ICU beds, the government has gone out of its way to make that much harder to find and track because they don't want Albertans to know and be informed and be able to hold them accountable. This government is currently under investigation by the Office of the Privacy and Information Commissioner for some unprecedented stretching, it seems, of freedom of information laws and practices. So if a government that has already demonstrated that it seeks to hide information from Albertans, to have less transparency and less accountability, wants to now take even more extraordinary power for itself, the least they could do is show a gesture of good faith in ensuring that they are being transparent and accountable, especially in a matter as serious as its decisions and its conduct in the midst of a public health emergency. Unfortunately, Madam Chair, I'm not seeing many nods of agreement. I'm seeing much studious looking at phones. The second part of this would provide that when the minister receives a copy of an order, an exemption, or the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health under subsection 2.14, the minister would immediately publish a copy of that order, exemption, or advice of the Chief Medical Officer on the Department's publicly accessible website. Now, there was a requirement during the pandemic that these public health orders be published, but repeatedly, Madam Chair, through the pandemic, public health orders that had significant impact on individuals, organizations, businesses, would not be published for days after they were issued. I remember Dr. Hardcastle frequently raising this concern, and I would get those calls to my office. We would get those emails from folks we had reached out to, that we were communicating to, indeed in many of the government members' constituencies, asking for clarity, seeking this information, and this government dragging its feet on providing it to Albertans. So again, a simple provision to ensure then that when the public health orders, which this government is now giving itself the power to create and the sole power to create, when it does so, it's a simple thing. Publish it. Put it up on the publicly available website. You've had the chance to debate it in Cabinet. You've had the chance to oversee it. You've reviewed it multiple times. You've got the wording right. What's the delay? Put it up on the website. Along with the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, on whose advice the Minister of Justice has assured us they will absolutely, certainly be taking into account. And since they will be making principled decisions in the best interests of Albertans, this government should have no fear of publishing what that advice was. And indeed, this government has repeatedly assured us that they only want to make these decisions in the best interests of Albertans, that they simply want to do right by the people who have elected them. Well, they can do so then by holding themselves accountable, by being genuinely transparent. And if they choose to vote against this amendment, Madam Chair, what they are telling the people of Alberta is that they believe they have the right to unprecedented power. They believe they have the right to ultimate decision-making on things that will have a deep impact on people's lives, and that in doing so, they believe they do not have to explain themselves, ever. That they can simply make those decisions without evidence, without demonstrating why, and without answering for the question. And indeed, as we have them currently under investigation, that they will probably make it far more difficult to actually even access that information at all. That is not a government that has the backs of Albertans, Madam Speaker. That is not a government that is standing up for Alberta. That is a government that is looking out for itself. And despite the fact that we repeatedly saw that kind of behavior in the midst of the pandemic, it's my hope that maybe this government might have a bit more of a conscience now. We'll give them the opportunity to see when we vote on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any members wishing to join the debate on the Amendment A2? Seeing none, I will. The Honourable. No. Any other members wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will have to call the question. On Amendment A2, as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is defeated. A division has been called. Ring the bells. members, the division has been called on Amendment A2. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand.
Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Wright, Honourable Mr. Sabier, Honourable Member Hoffman, Mr. Ellingson, Mr. Ip, Honourable Ms. Sigurdsson, Ms. Goring, Mr. Dack, Member Brar.
All those opposed, please stand.
Honourable Mr. Guthrie, Honourable Mr. Glubish, Honourable Mr. Nicolaides, Honourable Mr. Williams, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Honourable Mr. Horner, Honourable Mr. Scow, Honourable Mr. Ellis, Honourable Mr. Amory, Honourable Mr. Newdorf, Honourable Mr. Lowen, Honourable Mr. Wilson, Honourable Mr. Jean, Honourable Mr. Dreeshen, Honourable Mr. Nixon, Mr. Long, Mr. Yao, Honourable Mr. Turton, Honourable Mr. Nally, Honourable Ms. Furr, Honourable Mr. Jones, Honourable Mrs. Sawney, Mr. Getson, Honourable Mr. Sigurdsson, Honourable Mr. Yassin, Honourable Mr. Hunter, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Sear, Mr. Lunty, Mr. Boychenko, Mr. McDougall, Mr. Wright, Mrs. Petrovic, Ms. Lovely, Mr. Dick, Honourable Ms. Armstrong-Homenuk, Ms. DeYoung, Mr. Sinclair, Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Singh, Mr. Stephan, and Mrs. Johnson.
Madam Chair, total for the amendment 10, total against 43.
Members, that amendment has been defeated. Any members wishing to join the debate on Bill 6? Seeing none, I will call the question on Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023, and the clauses of the bill. Are you agreed? Any opposed? No. Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we rise and report Bill 5 and 6.
Having heard that motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. Member for Athabasca, Barhead, Westlock.
Madam Speaker, the Committee of the Whole has had under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills: Bill 5, Bill 6. Madam Speaker, I wish to table copies of all amendments considered by the Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly concur in the report? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried.
For third reading, Bill 6, Public Health Amendment Act 2023. Honourable Mr. Amory.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much again, Madam Speaker. Pleased to rise today to speak to third reading of Bill 6 and to move third reading of Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act. I want to thank my colleagues for acknowledging their commitment to this bill as we amend the Public Health Act. We are amending the decision-making process during states of public health emergencies to ensure that elected, accountable, transparent, and represented officials are making decisions during such events. We are doing this considering the Ingram Court decision, which determined that public health orders issued under Section 29 of the Public Health Act in response to the COVID-19 pandemic did not align with Alberta's legislation. It's important that people elected by Albertans have the discretionary authority to make final decisions based on scientific and medical public health factors during a declared state of public health emergency. As I've noted previously in this House, the Public Health Act in its current form requires that all decisions with respect to Section 29 public health orders, such as those issued in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, be made by medical officers of health, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Madam Speaker, amendments to Section 29 of the Public Health Act will clarify Cabinet's role in decision-making for public health orders during a declared state of public health emergency. Cabinet would be responsible for decisions respecting all persons or a group of persons, including a group of businesses, individuals, nonprofits, and educational settings. And medical officers of health, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health, would retain final decision-making authority for orders impacting specific persons or a specific public place. Madam Speaker, elected representatives bear the responsibility to act in the utmost and best interests of Albertans, taking an oath to diligently and faithfully exercise the powers and trust bestowed upon them. This legislation guarantees that the ultimate authority in decision-making during a declared state of public health emergency, along with the accompanying accountability and transparency, reside in the hands of those elected by Albertans. To further Cabinet's decision-making authority, proposed changes in Bill 6 add a paramountcy clause that would provide Cabinet with the discretionary authority to, by order, reverse or vary any public health decision of any decision maker under the Act. I appreciate the debate on these important amendments. I am confident that the majority of members in this chamber comprehend and endorse the purpose behind this legislation. I urge each member once again to cast their vote in favor of this bill. With that, Madam Speaker, I ask that we move third reading of Bill number 6. Thank you.
Are there any members that wish to join the debate? Third reading of Bill 6. The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to rise and speak to third reading of Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act. This government has acknowledged that the Act is in response to the Ingram decision. The Court of King's Bench Justice Romain ruled that Alberta's elected officials overstepped their authority in making the final decisions on health measures during a public state of health emergency. The statement clarifies that those decisions should have been made by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Further, the Justice Romain stated that the interventions at the time were justified. But to ensure that we don't overstep our bounds again, this government, the UCP, is simply changing the law. When the Chief Medical Officer of Health will retain the decision of authority over a single person, but not over groups of persons we're concerned. It is disconcerting that decisions will be politicized and not based on science, nor will they be transparent, having seen this government vote down an amendment to increase transparency and ensure transparency in future decisions. One might ask who Cabinet will be seeking advice from. If only Albertans could trust this government to make accountable, transparent decisions based on science. If the goal was to make scientific decisions, one might ask the scientific background of those others being brought in to provide advice in decision-making. Let's take a moment to look at some past public health emergencies and outbreaks and what we learned from them. The World Health Organization has done considerable work, particularly around the 2003 SARS outbreak, and raised several points that we should in this House be paying attention to. The first is that transparency is the best policy. It was noted during the SARS outbreak that regions and countries dangerously did not acknowledge the presence of SARS, downplayed its extent, in some instances attempted to prove that it was something else, sweeping it under the rug, if you will. It is dangerous to think that we may be bringing in additional advice not based on science, with the Chief Medical Officer of Health not being our sole source of advice, that we might be downplaying the extent of COVID. That was a common narrative throughout Alberta in the days of the COVID pandemic, that the COVID was nothing more than the standard flu, that we shouldn't be paying attention to it, that it was not as serious as health authorities suggested. Opening the possibility of these beliefs to hold sway in decisions of public health is unacceptable. Further to the points of transparency, it is noted that any region that has a weak response to pandemic threats and issues of public health risk the security of other regions. That it is collection and collaboration amongst scientists that maps and identifies genomes of viruses to help us understand and halting spreads. It takes concerted effort from government and dedicated resource to gather data, and share our understanding of the data. This bill opens the door to not only changing our localized response on the ground, putting our own citizens at risk, but the ability to share, gather, and share data, thereby putting others at risk as well. It is clear the government does have concerns about the economic impact of our collective response to public health emergencies. But should public health interventions be justified as they were, according to Justice Romaine's decision, we should be allowing science in making those public health decisions. Madam Chair, I have noted that a court decision states the measures taken were justified, that the UCP government overstepped its bounds, and now we simply want to make sure that we can legally make those same measures without courts ruling that we're overstepping our bounds. What would have been the result if political decisions had been made where we did not take the interventions that we did during COVID? What might have happened to our citizens at that time? Madam Chair, this bill places the public health of our citizens in jeopardy, and I do strongly encourage the members of this House to vote against this bill. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to join the debates on Bill 6? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Southwest.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to rise in third reading and speak against Bill 6, Public Health Amendment Act 2023. As much as members on the other side will likely disagree with me, Bill 6 stands to open the floodgates of political interference in public health and has the potential to endanger Albertan lives. I'm troubled by how broad and sweeping the bill is. Bill 6 is self-serving in many ways that will give ministers or any government ample opportunity to insert themselves in matters that, frankly, they have no business inserting themselves into. And let me be clear, we should not be politicizing public health, especially certainly by politicians who are not qualified to be making decisions on health matters in the first place. Bill 6 creates the kind of situation where people can simply lobby their MLA to keep a negligent kitchen open and do so behind closed doors, as an example. Madam Speaker, there are privileges but also limits for members of this House. Public health decisions should be made based on evidence and science for the protection of all Albertans, not populist ideals. I want to take a few moments to speak about the consolidation of power, which I find troubling, because Bill 6 basically concentrates power with Cabinet, whose members are in no way qualified to make very important and serious health decisions. In fact, I would argue that the bill gives the government godlike powers. The way that it is written, it doesn't just give Cabinet the power to override the Chief Medical Officer of Health. It also gives Cabinet the ability to override the decisions of anyone empowered within the Public Health Act. So this isn't just contained within public health emergencies. It also includes matters that are relatively routine. I'll give you the example of health inspectors, professionals, trained experts who are there to serve the public. And let me emphasize, no government should have this kind of power. Very few members of this House, with the exception of the member from Calgary Varsity, have any specialized background in healthcare, including members of this current Cabinet. And that's okay, because it's not our role as members of this House to be technical experts. In fact, as elected members of this House, we do, however, have a heavy responsibility to make decisions for the interest and protection of our respective constituents. And in order to make informed decisions, we rely on experts and trained professionals, particularly when it comes to matters of life and death. Public health must be governed with the principles of prudence and with the public interest in mind. But Bill 6 eliminates those boundaries between the qualified civil service and their advice as well as political leadership. What Bill 6 then allows is politicians to insert themselves into public health decisions that they don't like, frankly, and it opens very blatantly the floodgates to political interference. I think about recently the matters when it comes to E. coli outbreaks and other serious public health matters. What would have happened if it was up to politicians to sort of make those decisions? You know, if we're not careful, Bill 6 can easily mean more chaos, uncertainty in our healthcare system. And I think back, Madam Speaker, to the 18th Premier's particularly memorable event when the 18th Premier declared that Alberta was open for summer. It was a debacle. We later learned that this was done so against the advice of his chief medical officer, and indeed the chief medical officer at the time was right. It was a premature decision, and it cost Albertan lives. And so let that be a cautionary tale, because we've seen what happens when politicians interfere in emergency public health matters. But as I mentioned, Madam Speaker, this bill isn't just contained to public health emergencies. It is a broad, sweeping bill that empowers Cabinet to actually micromanage very routine health matters. And so let me take health inspectors, for example. Health inspectors should go about their business and their job without reprisal and with great independence. In fact, the minimum threshold for any non-specialist to override decisions of public health inspectors should be very, 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 very high if there should be a mechanism for that to happen at all. So it would be hard to imagine that elected officials and politicians like cabinet members have any business in potentially overriding the decisions of health inspectors. But, Madam Speaker, this bill enables just that. It allows and sets the stage for potential abuses of power. And I'm not just sort of talking about abstract potential abuses of power. Health inspectors have very, very good reasons to issue an order, and we don't want there to be a situation where folks who are, perhaps contravening health orders can lobby their MLAs to overturn those sorts of decisions. But this bill does exactly that. It sets the stage for the dynamic and the possibility of politicians being lobbied to overturn decisions by public health officials, and that simply in my mind, is very, very dangerous. In fact, Bill 6 doesn't even require Cabinet to consult or seek advice from the Chief Medical Officer of Health before inserting themselves in a matter. There is no transparency in how Cabinet members may go about interfering with certain health decisions. And in fact, worse yet, if a government makes a decision that is on the complete opposite side of what public health officials advise, the public will never know about it. There is no accountability. And so when we look at the crux of this act, it does not serve the public, Madam Speaker. It is a self-serving bill to give this Cabinet all the powers that it wants so that they can do the convenient thing, and that is not right. We all have a responsibility as members of this House to uphold our responsibility to protect the public, and this bill fails in that. And so I encourage all members of this Assembly to vote against this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to join the debate? The honourable member for Calgary Northeast.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This UCP government loves to have all the power in their hands. And that's exactly what this bill does. Healthcare decisions should be made to protect the health of Albertans and our province, and not to satisfy the ideology of any political party. As this Assembly heard today that the Minister of Justice said that decisions should be made based on scientific evidence. But when we look at the record of this government, when we look at the record of this Premier, there are serious questions that can be raised. And during pandemic, this Premier suggested that hydroxychloroquine as a cure to COVID-19. That was not scientific, that was not based on any evidence. And this shows that how Albertans can trust this cabinet or this government about the health decisions that they will be making. Albertans would like to know that which other jurisdiction has same kind of legislation. Albertans want their government to work like a decent government. They do not want any government to give itself a godlike power. There is a reason we call experts experts. They certainly know better than others, and during unprecedented times, their decisions, their opinions, their analysis must be listened, heard, and should be respected. This bill will put the cabinet in the driving seat of the car, which they have no idea how to drive. Minister of Justice also claimed that Chief Medical Health Officer of Health will have a vital role to play. If the Chief Medical Officer of Health does not have the decision-making power that will be implemented, then what kind of vital role is left to play? People in my riding, they tell me all the time that they need more hospitals, they need more healthcare workers, and they need better public healthcare system where they don't have to pay out of pocket to go see a family doctor. They do not want their government to give itself sweeping powers. They want their government to deliver what they need and what they deserve. Albertans are watching their elected officials today, and it is time to work for the people who elected us and not for ourselves. And law experts, Lorian Hardcastle and Sean Fluker from University of Calgary have raised serious concerns about this bill, which I would like to share with this Assembly, so the members of the Assembly can make a proper decision based on the analysis of experts. And they have clearly said in the report that one of the fundamental problems with this act, which this Bill 6 does not address, is the phrase public health emergency. That this phrase public health emergency is used throughout the Act without an explicit tethering to the declaration in section 52.1. The Act makes reference to the distinction between the existence of public health emergency and a declared state of public health emergency in section 12.12. And section 1 defines there are two kinds of public health emergencies under the Act: an emergency that exists based on the definitions in section 1, which is the illness that creates a significant risk to the public health, and an emergency that is declared by cabinet under section 52.1. And this bill does not address this. A primary concern with Alberta's pandemic response was the extent to which public health decisions appeared to be politically motivated. And as it turns out, this appearance reflected exactly what was going on, as the authority to make COVID-19 public health orders was unlawfully delegated to or taken by cabinet. This concern with the politicization of public health has has only deepened with the current UCP government, which has summarily dismissed public health officials and adopted a very authoritarian tone on public health governance and health care more in general. The underlying issue here is a lack of transparency in decision-making, which Bill 6 does nothing to change. And with that being said, Madam Speaker, I request all the members of this Assembly to vote against this bill. Thank you very much.
Any other members to join the debate? The honourable member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023, and I thought I'd begin with the definition. The definition of public health. Public health is the organized effort of a society to keep people healthy and to prevent injury, illness, and premature death. It is a combination of programs, services, and policies that protect and promote the health of all Canadians. That means that protecting and promoting the health of all Canadians includes the idea of the common good, what is good for all, what is good for most. And while keeping that definition of public health in mind, I also want to add the following sentence: just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is a phrase I often used while teaching, and it was meant to remind my students about their responsibility as a member of our classroom community. Part of that responsibility meant actively reflecting on their actions and their words, and if necessary, figuring out what it was they needed to do as an individual, sometimes as a group, when a mistake was made. How they could repair the harm, how to make things better, how to reflect upon what they learned and act in a way that would show their classmates that they could be trusted. But Madam Speaker, this government made a mistake during the pandemic. The decisions were made in cabinet instead of through the authority of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And eventually that mistake was revealed. But instead of reflecting upon that mistake and instead of learning from that mistake, we have this bill. Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act. This is the bill that gives Cabinet sweeping power, the right to ignore the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. There is absolutely no requirement to share with Albertans what advice exactly that expert recommended. This would be the opposite of being transparent. I do not want my grandchildren, who no doubt will face both endemics and pandemics and epidemics in their future, to be making their decisions in the absence of advice, in the absence of facts, and in the absence of knowledge, and also in the absence of knowing why a decision was made and in what context. Madam Speaker, in the midst of that epidemic or pandemic, a public health emergency, the public must have a measure of trust in both government and experts. That trust is built by transparency. As my colleague from Edmonton Centre noted, by actions such as debate in this House, by sharing information to the public in a responsible manner. During a province-wide declared state of emergency, quite frankly, I would like to hear from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, from the scientists, from the experts, with government members alongside, not above, alongside. Public health decisions should be made by health experts and should not be subject to political whims or as a result of the wishes expressed by a teeny tiny small group of people. Those public health decisions are supposed to be about the best interests and protection of Albertans, but this bill isn't about that. This bill is a perfect example of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And with that in mind, I urge my colleagues to vote against Bill 6.
Any other members wishing to join the debate? Seeing none, would the Honourable Minister... The question shall now be put. The Honourable Minister of Justice has moved third reading of Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried. You're good? The Honourable Government House Leader.
You said I need to say bill read a third time?
Yeah.
Bill 6, the Public Health Amendment Act 2023, is now read a third time.
The Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all the members of the Assembly for their diligent work this week. Though I do see the clock is almost 4:30, I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 1:30 p.m. Monday, November 27th, 2023.
That motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, say no. So carried. House stands adjourned till Monday. Out.
Speaker, that would be December 4th.
Monday at 1:30.
No, Monday at 1:30, Madam
Monday
Speaker.
at 1:30.
I'd like to amend that motion to say Monday 1:30. That'd be December 4th, I believe.
House is adjourned till Monday, 1:30, December 4th. Order.